He was a popular high school teen with a big heart.
He was loved by everybody. He was there for anybody, anytime.
He was a really likable and caring person.
Until his life was violently stolen while he slept.
It was unbelievable because I was trying to figure out what was going on.
We pretty much are starting with a blank slate.
It was really a whodunit. Don't have a lot of answers.
Detectives unearth a world of deceit and intimidation.
She said if he would have just kept his mouth shut, this never would have happened.
There were two teenagers bragging about being connected with a homicide.
He was already in custody, so was this something that he had orchestrated?
To reveal a sinister plot.
A fisherman contacted the police department and said, hey, I found this gun.
So that was a twist where you never would have expected that.
The whole scenario was crazy.
And discover a mastermind no one expected.
We were dumbfounded, like, what just happened here?
I don't think anybody thought that this is how it would end.
I felt totally betrayed. I wasn't just shocked. I was floored.
Set against the picturesque backdrop of the Oregon mountains, the small town of Eugene is 100 miles south of Portland.
The community is nice. It's a good place to raise a family. It's a college community. The University of Oregon is there. It's a beautiful area of the Pacific Northwest.
Eugene's a small town, relatively. We're like the second or third largest city in Oregon, but that's still about 200,000 people. It's a quiet place.
In the early morning hours on Monday, October 3rd, 1994, the serenity of this close-knit community is shattered.
A 911 call was made. It was a mother who was in anguish. Her teenage son had been seriously injured, bleeding from his head.
Emergency units race to the home, arriving in a matter of minutes.
When the first responders arrived, they were able to quickly assess that it was a gunshot wound to the head. And although he was unconscious, he was still alive.
As paramedics battle to save the teen, police arrive to investigate the shooting. Janice Itura identifies the victim as her 18-year-old son, Aaron Itura.
Aaron Itura was almost immediately transported to the hospital.
As detectives get to work, they need to determine who would shoot a teenage boy and why.
In short order, we're preserving the scene, beginning to document it with photographs, and start gathering information. His bedroom had been partitioned off inside the attached garage of the residence. He had furnished it or decorated it as, typical teen male would. He had been in bed asleep with a girl that he was dating at the time. We knew he had sustained a devastating gunshot wound to the head.
The girlfriend who was lying beside him was unharmed. Police ask her to wait with the family while they continue to investigate the crime scene.
And a fragment of the bullet was found at the scene. It seemed like the caliber of the gun was a .38 caliber.
The weapon is nowhere to be found, and there's no sign of forced entry to the home.
Somebody had just opened the garage door. It wasn't locked.
There's nothing of value missing. Detectives wonder if the attacker could have a personal motive.
If somebody had a gun and they went in there to steal property, but the people woke up and discovered them, you would expect both people to be shot. The fact that one person wasn't shot and the other one was would indicate that there's a motive to single that person out.
With the crime scene yielding little information, detectives question those closest to Aaron, his family and girlfriend, who were at the scene of the crime.
I mean, it was a really whodunit out of the blue. Don't have a lot of answers.
The police department were still trying to figure out what happened and who was involved.
The detective questions how Janice came to find Aaron.
Aaron had gone to his room and his girlfriend Carrie was spending the night. And then all of a sudden, about 1:30 in the morning, I hear screaming. I went out to the bedroom, and here's Aaron on the bed, and his girlfriend Carrie's just freaked out. And I looked at Aaron, and he had a big old gash on his head. Then I saw blood. And I called 911, and then I just grabbed him and held him for a while. I was trying to figure out what happened.
Aaron Itura was born on December 28, 1975. He was the oldest of 5 children, raised by single mom Janice.
Aaron was a good kid. He was there for anybody, anytime. And he had a lot of responsibilities as far as helping out, because I worked sometimes 2 jobs, and he took care of all of his young siblings.
Growing up, Aaron was always tall for his age and came to be known as a gentle giant.
People described him a big, lovable teddy bear. He was a really likable and caring person with a mom who was really involved in his life.
In his last year of high school, Aaron was popular, well-respected, and easygoing.
Well, he liked to draw. He wanted to go to art school in New York, and that was his goal.
Recently, Aaron had found love with a local girl named Carrie.
She worked at the little neighborhood store, and they had been dating about 4 or 5 months.
Aaron took pride in his community and was highly active in the area's anti-gang movement.
He had the courage to step up and do what was right. He was just the type of guy that people came to with their problems. He was the protector. He watched out for everybody.
Aaron was looking ahead to a bright future. No one can think of anyone who'd want to shoot this young man point blank in his own bed. Investigators turned to Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie, who was lying next to him during the attack. Carrie tells detectives she awoke to the sound of the gunshot, but couldn't see much in the dark.
Carrie, the girlfriend, certainly needs to be looked at as a potential suspect because of her proximity at the time the shooting occurs.
The police decided to take her down to the police station and to talk to her in a lot more detail about what she knew.
While police transfer Carrie to the station, detectives focus on Aaron's family.
In the early stages, it's really important to exclude witnesses from being possible suspects. Part of the procedure of the police was to take gunshot residue swabs from the people in the house.
I needed to get to the hospital. I needed to see how he was, but we couldn't leave. We had to wait till we were cleared through the gunpowder residue testing.
Aaron's mom and siblings test negative for gunshot residue. They immediately race to the hospital.
Janice was almost immediately notified by a doctor that her son's brain scans showed that there was no brain activity.
The nurse was trying to tell me that, he's not going to make it.
Later that morning, the decision is made to take Aaron off life support.
I think he just was done fighting. I lost a big chunk of my heart. I just couldn't believe that I'll never see him again.
As Aaron's family grieved their devastating loss, at the station, detectives interview Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie. They ask her if she knows of anyone who would want to harm Aaron.
She claimed she didn't know why this occurred and who would have a motive to have killed him.
When detectives question Carrie about trouble in their relationship, she denies any problems.
Maybe she just wasn't being straight or truthful. Right off, you can't rule out the possibility that someone like Carrie may have shot Aaron for some personal motive.
Forensics check Carrie's hands and clothing to determine if she fired the weapon that killed Aaron.
Gunshot residue wasn't there. Swabs confirmed that she was not involved in a shooting.
With Carrie ruled out as the shooter, police ask her if anything unusual happened that night. She tells police about a mysterious phone call Aaron received just hours before the crime.
Carrie had mentioned a call had been made to the house. It was some girl, just wanting to know if Aaron was there. And then the caller hung up.
Investigators have Carrie walk them through the moments before Aaron was shot.
She said she was laying next to him. They were both fast asleep when she was awakened by some noise, which, as it turns out, was a gunshot.
Then, Carrie reveals a crucial detail.
Carrie becomes a key part of the investigation. She mentioned that she had seen who did it.
Coming up, the investigation takes a stunning turn.
what we learned indicated that they knew a lot more about what happened than what they'd said originally.
And unravels a tale of betrayal.
And I'm just like, did I just hear her say what I think I heard her say?
There was almost something pathological about their relationship.
To reveal a ruthless killer hiding in plain sight.
They were absolutely a master manipulator.
It was what they call a Jekyll and Hyde.
It was really shocking how the case turned.
Police are investigating the murder of 18-year-old Aaron Itura, gunned down in his sleep. Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie, is the sole eyewitness to the crime, and police are hoping she can provide them with a lead.
The police department are still trying to figure out what is the reason why he would be singled out and killed.
Detectives continue to question Carrie about the details surrounding the murder.
Carrie provided information to the police that it was two killers. She believed they had their faces covered with bandanas and their hands covered, so she could not get a good description of them. She was able to identify them as young males, but not much beyond that.
But who could the two masked assailants be? Police ask Carrie if she can think of anyone in her recent past who would want to harm Aaron.
She might have had a jealous ex-boyfriend and might have had a grudge against Aaron that she would have been aware of. And so we were exploring all of those avenues to find any potential connections.
After interviewing Carrie, police dig into her background and find no serious ex-boyfriend or anyone else that could link to the crime. With no significant leads, investigators turn to the community for help.
We pretty much are starting with a blank slate. The police had kind of fanned out, into the community and were asking people whether they knew anything about what had happened to Aaron Itura.
But no one heard or saw anything suspicious. For this laid-back community, news of Aaron's brutal murder is a shock.
All we knew was this young man had been sleeping in his bed and somebody had gotten in there and shot and killed him. We were dumbfounded, like, what just happened here? This is Eugene, Oregon. You don't have young people being killed right in their home, in their bedroom while they're sleeping. And people were scared.
Detectives begin to look at Aaron's work with the anti-gang group. Had he made some dangerous enemies?
Law enforcement was certainly concerned about gang activity. There was a sense, anyway, that Aaron, he's been at these anti-gang task force meetings, and now this kid has been shot in the head. So it certainly raises questions.
Police learned that Aaron had been working closely with local anti-gang activist Mary Thompson.
A lot of people knew who Mary Thompson was. She was wanting to sound the alarm about gangs in Eugene. And she established herself as kind of the citizen voice among law enforcement and other agencies dealing with that. She was a working mom with a teen, her son Bo, who was getting in and out of trouble.
Mary Thompson was involved in publicizing the threat of gangs. How that developed for her was that her son, Bo, who was 16 and had gotten involved in some gang activity and serious crimes.
She said he's a member of a local Crip gang, and if it can happen in my family, it can happen in any families. And oftentimes, she was going to various schools and in the media for an anti-gang sentiment.
Mary's home was open to troubled teens trying to avoid gang life, but she needed help with her expanding network.
Aaron got approached in school about assisting with the community outreach. He took that role seriously.
Aaron was very proud. Sometimes I could hear him talking to his sisters about, I've got to do this. I'm going to help some kid someday, and Mary's on the right track. I thought she was amazing. Here's a woman that's 40-some years old, and she is out with Aaron, making people aware, because most people in this town had no idea that this was going on.
The day after the murder, investigators pay Mary a visit, looking for a lead.
She was shocked that Aaron Itura had been shot and killed, and more than willing to try to help in any way that she could. She offered a whole list of names of people that she knew were associated with him.
Then, Mary shares a disturbing detail.
When the police went to talk to Mary Thompson, she told them about a gang member from Portland that was a Crip that had stopped by her house looking for Aaron Itura before the homicide. And she identified him by the name of Sonny and said what kind of car he was driving. And this gang was dangerous.
He wasn't somebody that she previously knew, just that he had showed up and was inquiring about Aaron. Where does he live and what can you tell me about him, sort of thing. Her information was that people in the gang life up in Portland were upset because of Aaron's cooperation in anti-gang efforts. Given the proximity of when this had occurred to Aaron's death, you couldn't ignore that this might all be coming out of people in Portland. She provided a general description of Sonny and of a car that he was driving. He wasn't on our radar. So the information about Sonny was documented and passed on and shared with the Portland Gang Bureau.
While Portland's gang unit tracked down Sonny, Eugene police talk with Aaron's friends. Had Aaron been concerned for his own safety before the murder?
They said before the homicide, Aaron Itura told them a story about a gang member wanting to do harm to him. But there's not a lot of information.
This could be significant. This might, in fact, be gang-related. So we were looking for the active gang member of Sonny.
Less than 36 hours after Aaron Itura is found shot in his bed, investigators believe the cold-blooded murder of the teen could be tied to his work in an anti-gang group. According to Aaron's mentor, Mary Thompson, a gang member named Sonny had been looking for him.
The result of the inquiry with Portland has come back and they came up blank. They had no information about any Sonny. The car description didn't match anything in their files. So it was a big zero. You know, they were saying, we don't have anything. So as a result of that, we were frustrated that we didn't have a suspect.
Then, detectives received the autopsy results.
Aaron sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the head, and it was a single shot.
It was an aim shot with a .38 caliber to the back of the head that would go through the brain, would have almost 100% chance of causing the death of the person that was hit.
48 hours into the case, with few clues to investigate, the pressure on police increases.
There's a sense of uncertainty and unease, you know, that can permeate the community if you don't solve this crime, if it remains unsolved.
When you're in a small community, you want some answers because somebody out there in the town we live in snuck into the bedroom of this young man and killed him. That's scarier than anything when you don't know any other details.
The lack of progress also takes a toll on Aaron's family.
There was times that I would have been willing to follow Aaron, but I put my grief on the back burner. Continue taking care of my kids because it's not their fault. But it was so hard with just certain songs, certain times. I just would kind of collapse. It's just kind of what you do.
Fortunately, Janice isn't without support. Friends like Aaron's mentor, Mary, help the family get through tough times.
Mary Thompson was very sorry. She couldn't understand who would ever do that. We both were grieving. So I got some really nice words from her. I'm in the mindset of, well, we're going to catch who did this, who shot him. And she's like agreeing with me, yeah, we need to find out who did this.
At the station, police search for new leads and find a report about a recent incident involving Aaron, and are surprised when they come across a familiar name.
Mary Thompson's son, whose name was Bo Flynn, was connected to this case. He was 16 years old. Bo had been involved in the juvenile system before for his violence and criminal activity. He was empowered and emboldened by dangerous crime.
We learned that Mary asked Aaron to keep an eye out for Bo and try to steer him clear of trouble. The plan was just simply for Aaron to spend time with Bo, be a positive influence.
But instead of Bo moving away from trouble, he drags Aaron into it. 3 weeks before the murder, they have a dangerous encounter.
Bo and Aaron were in West Eugene and encountered some other youths. And one of them had some prior issue with Bo. Bo suspected that this kid had snitched him off, or they got into an argument or whatever it might be. The confrontation escalated. Bo, who was carrying a knife, produced the knife and ended up cutting the other kid. Patrol officers arrived and they both were arrested.
Aaron went to the Lane County Jail. They had to go down and get him. And I was so mad at him that I said, "You're responsible for your actions." But he did know right from wrong. And he was not afraid to stand up for what was right.
Then, Aaron makes a risky decision to testify against Bo. Aaron was killed on October 3rd, just 2 days before he was due to give his witness statement. Was this the reason for Aaron's murder?
We consider the possibility that Bo was involved in the killing, especially as this potential motive emerged that Aaron was a witness in a pending case against Bo that would result in him being incarcerated potentially 3 or 4 years.
Investigators pay a visit to Bo, who's in custody at the state's juvenile facility for the knife assault.
He was already in custody at the time that the homicide occurred, so was this something that Bo had orchestrated?
When detectives interview Bo Flynn and ask him what happened, Bo Flynn says, "I didn't do anything, I don't know anything about it."
At the time, there wasn't any credible information that developed that suggested that he had orchestrated this crime.
The police don't have any evidence that gives Bo's role in the commission of this murder.
Having lost Bo as a viable suspect, detectives are at risk of hitting a standstill in the case. But then, Aaron's mom contacts police with a disturbing new lead.
I told him that somebody heard a couple of other people at the high school were talking about how they were going to take care of the big guy, and we all knew the big guy was Aaron because he was the biggest kid at Willamette High School.
We also were hearing rumors that there were 2 young gang members involved in the community bragging about being connected with a homicide.
Police dig deeper into these rumors, turning to Aaron's friends for more details.
When we're talking to kids that were associated with Aaron, we're just trying to find out, what do you know and who could have done this? Jim Elstad and Joe Brown had been identified as part of this loose-knit group of kids that were often frequenting the Thompson residence. And they were kind of on the fringe. The information persisted that both admitted and talked about the murder itself. They were saying that they had done the killing. They were proud of what they'd done. These kids needed to be contacted. Even as we were working, it was really shocking how the case turned.
Police investigating the execution-style shooting of 18-year-old Aaron Itura have a new lead. 2 local teens have been bragging about the killing.
What the word was on the street was Joseph Brown and James Elstad were the 2 individuals involved in the killing of Aaron Itura.
I knew they were friends of Bo's, but these kids were Aaron's friends as well. Jim Elstad grew up with my kids. His little brother was my daughter's best friend. And hearing that he would even be involved was just bizarre, but that's what they were saying.
We were told from the circle of kids that were being identified and contacted, said that Jim Elstad and Aaron Itura had been friends at one time, and that most recently, leading up to the homicide, that relationship had soured. So, a source of friction that should be explored and investigated.
Joe Brown and Jim Elstad, they didn't appear to have criminal records, so there wasn't a whole lot to go on.
Before police can speak to the 2 teens, they get a surprise visit from Mary Thompson.
She indicated that she also heard that Joseph Brown and Jim Elstad might have been involved in the homicide.
But what Mary reveals next stuns the detective.
The homicide happened on October 3rd in the early morning hours, and she tells the police that both Elstad and Brown ended up coming to her house after the homicide and telling her that they had killed Itura.
He acknowledged that she hadn't been entirely candid with us from the beginning. Her explanation for that was, well, I just didn't believe him. I just couldn't imagine them doing it. I wasn't seeing anything in their demeanor that suggests that they had done this homicide, and so I didn't volunteer that information up front because I didn't think it was credible at the time.
But now Mary believes the two teens could have been telling the truth. Armed with this new information, police bring Jim Elstad and Joe Brown to the station for questioning.
When they were interviewed, both of them denied any knowledge of the homicide. Elstad and Brown had agreed to take polygraphs as a way to clear themselves of suspicion. And so they were each polygraphed that same day, and both flunked.
Detectives grill the teens for hours, and eventually they break down and confess.
Brown and Elstad finally acknowledged that they had been involved and had done the homicide.
To understand how Aaron Itura was killed that night, police have Joseph Brown recreate the murder at the crime scene.
He had agreed to come back and do what we call a walkthrough, where you're basically doing a videotaped statement and you're describing, and in some instances you might even enact, what occurred.
Joe tells police he was the lookout, and Jim Elstad was the one who shot Aaron. But what was their motive?
Gradually, what emerged was they were upset because their homie Bo, was at risk of being incarcerated further because Aaron was cooperating with the police and was willing to testify against him in this knife incident.
In their statements, Joseph Brown and James Elstad took personal responsibility for the homicide. They did not say that their activities were at the direction of Bo.
Detectives need something concrete to corroborate their story, so they ask about the murder weapon. When police ask Joe Brown what happened to the gun, he tells them it's in the river.
After the homicide, Joseph Brown throws the gun into the river to dispose of it.
Police search the river for the gun, but can't find it.
The fact emerged, that we were looking for the weapon. A fisherman contacted the police department and said, hey, I don't know if it's connected or not, but I was fishing that stretch of the river and I found this gun. So a patrol officer is sent out and takes possession of the gun from him and books it into evidence. They then do a ballistic check on the gun and they find out it was consistent with the murder weapon.
You have their confession and you got the murder weapon, so you can corroborate their confession to the point where the conviction of those two people is solid.
On October 6, 1994, Jim Elstad and Joe Brown are arrested for the murder of 18-year-old Aaron Itura.
It was very hard to find out. Jim Elstad shot Aaron while he was sleeping. That was just unbelievable.
After the arrests, Aaron's mentor, Mary Thompson, reaches out to Janice.
Mary called me. First it was like, well, we need to get together, maybe have a coffee, and I'll buy you lunch. And then she said, if Aaron would have just kept his mouth shut, this never would have happened. And I'm just like, did I just hear her say what I think I heard her say? At that point, I got real concerned. So I called Detective Rainey and told him what happened.
What we learned indicated that Mary knew a lot more about what happened than she had said originally.
For police, Mary's alarming statement is one of many things they are now questioning.
Initially, it was thought to just be this homicide that had been committed by these two guys, but there was just this overriding perception that she was more involved than she had admitted.
Less than a week after 18-year-old Aaron Itura was shot to death in his bed, Former friends Jim Elstad and Joe Brown are charged with his murder. But now, the actions of Aaron's anti-gang mentor, Mary Thompson, have detectives thinking the case is far from over.
Mary Thompson's behavior had been raising some red flags.
She failed to mention that Brown and Elstad came to her house that night. It was just a convenient fact that she forgot to mention. And she also had made a call to Janice. That was actually unusual, suspicious in nature.
At that point, the police decided to take her down to the police station and to talk to her in more detail.
Investigators want to know why Mary withheld information surrounding Aaron's murder.
In that interview, she talks about being extremely angry with Aaron Itura after he informed on her son about the knife fight. But she didn't want him to be killed.
Do we know for sure that she's implicated in the murder? No. Can we prove it at that time? No.
Since police lack solid evidence that Mary is involved, they let her go. With the killers behind bars, Aaron's loved ones gathered to say their final farewells.
It was one beautiful, beautiful day. High school kids, teachers, counselors, they all showed up. Mary was there as well. And there was probably 2,000 people. People I didn't even know were there. Aaron was loved by everybody.
5 days after the arrest of Aaron's murderers, police are still troubled by Mary Thompson's unusual behavior. So they dig deeper into her past.
10 or 15 years prior, there was some other events in Josephine County, which is a county in southern Oregon. She had identified herself as being a person that was working as an assistant to prosecuting the drug trade. And it turned out that she was a methamphetamine manufacturer at that time, and that she got caught selling methamphetamine. Looking at Mary Thompson's past, she was engaged in a criminal activity. It was definitely shocking. She was a crime fighter that the community trusted, that had engaged in that kind of behavior. So that was a twist where you never would have expected that.
Mary's history proves she's capable of lying and manipulating to get what she wants. Now investigators wonder what she's capable of in connection to this case.
As we knew and learned more about her, it was pretty eye-opening, shocking even to investigators. Part of the picture that emerged about Mary was her relationship with her son, Beau, and how protective she had been of him.
She'd had a bunch of relationships in her life that had not turned out, and the only one that stayed with her was Beau Flynn, her son. And so she was willing to do things that were antisocial and illegal in order to maintain Beau's relationship with her. She viewed herself as being a peer. Instead of directing her son to be a law-abiding citizen, she chose to get in the criminal gutter with him.
There was almost, I'm no expert, but almost something pathological about their relationship in terms of what a parent will do to protect their child.
She knew that Aaron was the only thing standing between her and her son's charges.
After Beau, the only person that had motive to eliminate Itura as a witness was Mary Thompson.
Detectives start questioning the teens Mary claims she's been keeping out of gangs.
When we're talking to kids that were identified as having frequented the Thompson residence, they weren't involved in school, they didn't have healthy relationships, they were all kind of lacking something in their life and felt that. It seemed that she already had developed the family structure that she was able to manipulate for her own purposes. And she had somehow orchestrated the murder of Aaron Itura. And as a result of that, she began emerging more and more as this prime suspect.
But could Mary go so far as to have Aaron killed?
To advance this investigation, the idea came up about doing a wiretap to see if something was being said here that could be used to either eliminate Mary from suspicion or would lead to evidence to convict her of murder.
On the wiretap, detectives hear Mary's son, Beau, who's on parole, discussing gang activities with other gang members.
They called themselves the 74 Hoover Crips.
They were involved in selling drugs and stealing property. We were thinking it was possible Bo was in charge of the gang.
Just when investigators think Bo is the gang leader, someone else comes on the line.
It became quickly apparent that Mary was calling the shots. She was pressuring people to do stuff.
Mary Thompson's role in the gang is definitely as a leader.
They heard Mary planning robberies, beatings, car thefts, just a hive of criminal activity.
Mary Thompson, in her exchanges, in these intercepted phone calls, clearly is talking the talk. I mean, she knows the lingo, the street language, and she's a very legitimate threat. She tells them she's got connections outside of Eugene even that, if need be, she can marshal to come in and start dealing with people.
But nothing links Mary directly to Aaron's murder until she makes a telling statement.
There's a conversation that she has with a gang member, and she says, "Don't worry, I haven't screamed at you, have I? Aaron Itura got screamed at before he got whacked. He knew how I felt." So she essentially admits to the gang killing Itura.
We ripped off the veneer of her being this concerned mom who only immersed herself in this culture out of concern for her son. Facts that we're developing were pretty revealing.
Though the admission is damning, detectives know they'll need more to secure a conviction.
We felt that we needed a direct witness who would tell us about all these conversations that happened up and including the homicide of Aaron Itura. Our tactic was to break the gang, essentially, and to see what we could do about getting them to testify against Mary Thompson.
In the cold-blooded killing of Aaron Itura, police have arrested 2 young gang members. Now, wiretaps have revealed Aaron's anti-gang mentor, Mary Thompson, is actually a ruthless gang leader.
Mary Thompson became a prime suspect in the case, and the wiretaps were really instrumental in revealing the extent of the influence that Mary had.
Investigators are now convinced Mary is behind the 18-year-old's murder. But to charge her, they need additional evidence.
We arrested the gang for all of these crimes that they committed that we knew about during the wire, whether it was committing a burglary or stealing weapons.
Investigators then question the teen gang members, hoping to get them to flip on Mary. The prosecutor thinks their best shot lies with one of the youngest members of the gang, named Lisa.
We decided that we were going to give Lisa immunity on the condition that she testified about the gang and about the homicide of Aaron Itura.
Lisa agrees to tell investigators everything she knows.
It became pretty clear not only was Mary the leader of the gang, but when it came to eliminating Itura, the behavior of Elstad and Brown was guided by her.
Mary was always saying that something's got to be done about Aaron. We can't let him testify against Bo, and that shifted to actually killing him.
From Lisa's account of Aaron's murder, the missing pieces fall into place.
The Friday before the homicide, there's a big meeting of the gang at Mary Thompson's house. Mary encouraged Jim Elstad to commit the homicide. On the night of the murder, Lisa's role is that she is the one that calls Itura's residence. And when Itura answers the phone, she hangs up on him. And that information gets communicated back to Jim Elstad and Joseph Brown that Itura is at his house and they should go forward and commit the crime.
Mary tells Brown and Elstad to wait until everyone in the Itura home is asleep.
1:30 in the morning, when Aaron was in bed with our girlfriend, Carrie, they were both fast asleep. Brown and Elstad had snuck into the room, and Joe Brown was the lookout. And then Jim Elstad hadn't hesitated and fired once into Aaron's head. Carrie then was awakened by that noise. By then, Elstad and Brown had fled the garage. They go to Mary Thompson's house after having committed the homicide, and then Joe Brown gets taken to the river, and Mary Thompson takes him there to dispose of the gun. And this is kind of significant. That was even done at her suggestion.
At the outset of the investigation, Mary Thompson went to police with information on Brown and Elstad in an attempt to throw police off her trail.
Throughout all this, of course, Mary's trying to keep her fingerprints off of everything, so she's evading responsibility. But her influence, it resulted in Aaron Itura's death.
Mary Thompson was absolutely a master manipulator. That was demonstrated many, many times.
In February 1995, Mary is charged with aggravated homicide for her role in killing Aaron Itura.
I was floored. I just had no idea that Mary could have been involved at that extent. It was just what they call Jekyll and Hyde, you know. I felt totally betrayed by another mom.
I don't think anybody suspected when she was teaching us about gangs that she actually was planning the whole thing.
Everybody was trying to do the right thing by her and her crusades and her telling me how amazing my son was and the idea that he would go out and help her and then find out that she would have murdered my son herself.
In December 1994, Joe Brown and Jim Elstad received 10 and 16 years respectively after pleading guilty to the murder of Aaron Itura. Almost 2 years later, on June 4th, 1996, Mary Thompson goes to trial and pleads not guilty. Gang members testify in court, supporting the prosecution's case.
They all eventually, came on board and were effective witnesses.
After a 6-week trial, on July 23rd, 1996, the jury finds 41-year-old Mary Thompson guilty for her role in the murder of Aaron Itura.
It's been such an emotional trauma on us all. It's like, it's not only me that she's hurt, it's not only my son that she's destroyed, it's my family, his friends, the kids involved, everybody.
She's probably been doing this her whole life, but she didn't win.
Mary Thompson is sentenced to life in prison for aggravated murder, among other charges, including hindering the prosecution.
When you think of the level of deception that she perpetrated, and then ultimately to see her held responsible for that, that's a real satisfying feeling as an investigator. The whole case from beginning to end was unsettling. I don't think anybody would have gone into it thought that this is how it would end.
Aaron's loved ones find relief in the closing of that dark chapter in their lives. They try their best to move forward, but thoughts of the good-natured 18-year-old are never far away.
I talk to him daily, but my family was a whole unit. You got one spoke missing. He was the protector. I always feel he's here. He's around us. He still had the courage to do the right thing. And he did the right thing in the end, even though it cost him his life.
A selfless and caring mother of 3.
She always thought about other people. She was just a bright light shining.
Viciously murdered in her own home.
Her bedroom was incredibly blood-soaked, unlike I'd ever seen before.
There was anger involved in this crime.
I remember just screaming.
Investigators are sent down a rabbit hole of suspects.
She didn't like him, she didn't trust him.
It raised a red flag that there might be some sort of affair going on.
She was jealous of her life, of what she had.
There was clearly bad blood between them.
Every lead appears to turn into a dead end.
It just stalled.
That was disheartening.
Until a surprising witness comes forward.
It was unbelievable.
It was the break we were looking for.
Exposing a killer no one saw coming.
I was pretty shocked.
I just remember being sick to my stomach.
Cortland Township lies in the heart of Michigan.
It's fairly rural, nice, pleasant, kind of a good hometown feel.
It's one of those areas that everybody gets along, and when you're driving by their house, they're waving at you, and it's just peaceful and quiet.
This quaint community is stunned on Saturday, August 5th, 2006, when the Kent County Sheriff's Office receives a 911 call.
Emergency.
My daughter, we just found her in bed, and she's got a lash on her arm, and she's all bloody.
Just before 5 o'clock, we received a call of a potential suicide at the Pagel residence.
Officers are immediately dispatched to the home of 41-year-old Renee Pagel.
We were met by Renee's stepmother and her father. They were both just in shock. Renee's father indicated that his daughter was in her bedroom. When I first walked into the bedroom, I observed Renee laying on the bed. I could just remember seeing all the blood-soaked sheets, her shirt. There's blood on her face. It was obvious that Renee Pagel was deceased, and it wasn't a suicide. This was a homicide.
Officers secure the scene as homicide detectives arrive to investigate.
Her bedroom was incredibly blood-soaked, unlike I'd ever seen before. The bed was covered with blood. There was blood spatter on the walls, on the ceiling.
She was stabbed multiple times. I was pretty shocked by the amount of wounds that she had. When I looked at her hand, I saw a large laceration almost in the middle of her hand to be, in my opinion, a defensive wound. Renee was in the fight for her life. Unfortunately, she had lost.
For detectives, the viciousness of the attack is a clue itself.
It appears to us it's a crime of passion. Somebody has something against this victim, so much so that they want to brutalize this person as much as they possibly could.
This was personal.
Somebody went into that residence to murder Renee.
Who in Renee's life would want to attack her and could be capable of such violence? Born in 1965, Renee's spirit was always full of joy.
Renee was the most generous person I have ever known. She loved life. She was always smiling.
Renee Pagel devoted her life to helping others.
She was a nurse practitioner. She had done medical mission trips around the world. And then she also worked at a homeless clinic here in town. She always thought about other people.
Renee's greatest joy was being a mother of 3.
She loved her kids so much. She was a great mom.
Recently separated from Michael, her husband of 10 years, Renee shared custody of her children while always remaining a devoted mother.
The last couple years, because she wanted to be home with her kids and wanted to have some more normal hours, she chose to teach at a technical center.
Even as a teacher, Renee found new ways to help people.
One of her students had come into class one day and was really down, and Renee said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Well, my dad is dying. He needs a kidney." And so Renee agreed to give her kidney to this man who she had never met. She was just so selfless. And it manifested itself in so many ways.
Renee had undergone the kidney transplant surgery just 5 days before her stunning death.
So she was already in a weakened state when she was attacked.
Could the killer have timed the attack, knowing that Renee would be recuperating? Detectives look closer at her injuries, hoping they'll reveal telling details about the murder weapon.
It seemed to be a very strong and well-made knife and large. Just the amount of damage it did to the victim's body, it was at least an inch and a half blade that was wide.
There's no sign of the knife, but forensic technicians searched the bedroom for other evidence.
There was large amounts of blood that our scientific support unit had to collect, and they collected trace evidence like hairs and fibers for testing.
Detectives continue to search the rest of the home.
What struck me about this case that was kind of odd, there was no other areas in the house that were disturbed, that were bloody or anything tracked through the home. It seemed to be very honed in on just her bedroom.
It really kind of puzzled us as investigators.
It was the most bizarre scene I've ever been on.
This person, in my opinion, had to know that they had to cover their tracks, and I think it was planned, and they thought this out ahead of time.
As forensics continue their work, detectives speak with Renee's parents.
Her father, obviously, he was extremely upset. What he had just found out, his daughter brutally murdered.
Detectives ask her father to help them put together a picture of Renee's last known movements.
He last saw her the night before around 4 or 5 in the evening when he was picking up the children and bringing them to their father's house, who lived approximately 15 to 20 minutes away from Renee.
With Renee's children safe with their father at the time of the murder, she was home alone.
He told us he spoke with her on the phone around 8 or 9 in the evening, just checked in on her because obviously he had a lot of concern of her health.
Based on the state of the body, detectives believe Renee was murdered sometime between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. They ask her parents who Renee might have seen last.
Her father talked to me about a tenant, Mike Decker, who was an acquaintance of Renee that has been living on the property for approximately 1.5 years, 2 years. Also, he did speak about a contentious divorce with her husband, Michael, that she was going through. Mike wanted full custody. Mike wanted the home. Mike wanted to not work and have Renee work and be the provider. So that obviously piqued my interest.
Could either of these men have possibly wanted Renee dead? Detectives know they have to hit the ground running right away.
We have to find out who all these people are and go and start to question them to try to find out where they were on the night of the murder.
Coming up, investigators uncover an ominous obsession.
There was a lot of writings about his hatred for Renee.
Alarming secrets.
The ceiling had a hidden compartment.
Renee told me how betrayed she felt.
She was extremely upset. She was very hurt by this.
And the truth blindsides everyone.
We've never had a break like this.
It was, you're not gonna believe this. Just disbelief.
I'm still reeling from that one.
Detectives in a small Michigan town are investigating the vicious murder of 41-year-old mother of 3, Renee Pagel. Police are looking into 2 possible suspects, her tenant and her estranged husband. They first turn their attention to Renee's ex, Michael Pagel.
In the beginning, they seemed like your average all-American couple.
She did tell me that she did love him. She wanted marriage in a family, and he was the opportunity.
She looked at him, I think the words were the knight in shining armor. And speaking to friends of the family, they described Michael as a fantastic dad, that he was always about his children. Nobody said anything bad about him.
Married life seemed like a dream come true until cracks started to appear.
When I interviewed numerous people, I was told that Mike didn't want a full-time job. Mike wanted to be at home with the kids and let Renee do everything and support him. They were just having a lot of issues back and forth with one another. In early 2005, Mike abruptly surprised Renee with divorce papers.
She was very shocked and just sickened to the core.
There had been some turmoil in the past between them, but in her mind, things were actually getting better. They were kind of turning around, so she was blindsided by it.
She said to me, he expected, I mean expected, the house, the kids, and $2,000 a month.
In June 2006, just 7 weeks before she was murdered, Renee and Michael had their day in divorce court.
When the judge ruled in her favor and said that she got the kids, she got the house, and he was going to have to get a better paying job, something flipped in him.
Was Michael so angered by the ruling that he killed Renee in a furious rage?
There were a lot of things that put him at the top of our list as a potential suspect that had killed Renee.
Detectives go to question Michael.
When we arrived at Mike's house, he was not there. His mother said that he should be back shortly. And I said, just want to get an idea of what were you guys doing last night? And she said, well, Mike had the kids. They were having a fortnight in the living room where Mike had set up some pillows and some blankets. Then she stated about 8 in the morning, she and Michael had a brief conversation, and then they went about their day. So basically, she was giving him an alibi that he was home all night with the kids.
As police finish the interview with his mother, Michael arrives.
I explained to him that something had happened to Renee, and we would like to speak to you about this. When Michael was told that she had passed away, there was no reaction out of him. And immediately, without me even going any further, Michael reached into his wallet and gave me an attorney card and said, yeah, I've been told not to talk to the police. Here's my attorney. So I thought that was extremely odd that Michael didn't want to dig further into what happened to Renee.
After consulting with his divorce attorney, he told investigators he wouldn't answer any questions.
Michael's reticence to cooperate is a red flag. And on August 6th, the day after Renee's murder, police arrive at his home with a search warrant.
We were looking for any type of knife that may have been used during the murder. We took a lot of knives from the house, but we found no knives that matched the length and the size and the different characteristics of the knife that was used.
Police also collect hair samples and fingerprints from Michael.
We wanted to get photos of his body to make sure that there was no cuts or anything on him. We wanted to look at clothing to see if there was any blood trace evidence anywhere.
All the forensic evidence that we collected, we never found anything that was useful in our investigation.
All the knives in his home were examined, and there was nothing to link them to this crime.
We had no murder weapon. We had no real evidence. There was nothing. It was clean.
So when we left that search warrant, I would say we really came out empty-handed. We didn't have anything to tie this murder to Mike Pagel.
Despite his potential motive, Michael Pagel drops off detectives' list of suspects, while news of Renee's violent death quickly spreads across town.
Her friend called me and said, Chris, Renee's dead. It was surreal. I remember curling up in a fetal position and just screaming. I screamed. I was angry.
As her friends and loved ones struggle with her death, Renee's autopsy report comes in.
Cause of death was blunt force trauma, homicide. It was a large, heavy-duty knife that was used on her.
The autopsy revealed upwards of 50 stab wounds. There were numerous lacerations to the hands and the feet, suggesting defensive wounds.
She was stabbed over 50 times. I'm still reeling from that one. It was so brutal.
Detectives continue their investigation and now focus their attention on Renee's tenant, Mike Decker.
She had this barn that had an upstairs apartment, and he was a renter.
The barn was about 75 yards away from the main home. He could have been involved, he could have been a witness, he could have overheard something. One of her friends believed that the week of her surgery, Renee was going to have pizza with Mike Decker, and that she felt that there was some type of maybe a relationship going on. So that sparked our interest. I mean, if he's having a relationship with Renee, did something happen to cause him to get upset and potentially do this horrific crime? We had to find him immediately.
Two days into the investigation of Renee Pagel's murder, detectives have a possible suspect. Her tenant, Mike Decker, who's rumored to be romantically involved with Renee. Detectives interview Mike at his apartment on Renee's property.
At first, I kind of thought loner, 30-year-old gentleman, unemployed, living above a barn. I thought that was kind of odd. When we were speaking to Mr. Decker, we asked him if he's having a relationship with Renee, romantic or whatnot.
Mike said that the relationship is more of a friendship or a kindness thing, no romantic involvement.
He denied having any dinner with Renee over the past week. He stated that it was actually a month or two before he suggested that they go out for pizza just as friends, but Renee had turned that down because she was busy.
Police ask Mike Decker where he was on the night of the murder.
He stated that he went into a local city to eat by himself, drove back probably between 8 or 9. When he arrived at home, he watches a little bit of TV and then goes to bed between 1 and 2 in the morning.
Detectives ask him if he heard anything that night, especially after what they had found at the crime scene.
We did locate a tire track and a footwear impression in Renee's driveway.
He denied hearing anything from Renee's house.
Mike tells police he didn't notice anything unusual the next morning either.
He woke up in the morning around 9 or 10 and then went to meet with his family to go see a bike race. Part of the problem with Mike Decker's alibi, even though he was cooperative through this process, he was on the property when this murder happened.
With no one to corroborate his alibi, police get a warrant to search Mike's apartment.
We seized his pipe from his sink because we wanted to see if there was any blood or trace evidence in there, and then we found a couple of large knives.
The evidence is rushed to the crime lab for analysis.
The knives and the pipe forensically did not show anything. There were no signs of blood.
We found no knives that matched the type of knife that was used.
But still, Mike cannot be ruled out. A week after the homicide, detectives interview him again, this time at the sheriff's office.
He showed no issues of concern of us looking at him as a potential suspect from gathering any type of physical evidence from him. We even offered him a polygraph, and Mr. Decker submitted to that also and passed without any deceit.
With nothing tying Mike Decker to the crime, investigators let him go. Searching for any further clues about Renee, detectives reach out to her parents once again, and in turn, get a lead on a new suspect, Renee's own sister, Michelle.
Renee's father stated that the relationship between Renee and Michelle was strained. He mentioned that Michelle was jealous of Renee's life, of what she had.
She wanted a successful career, a family, a home, all of those things.
Renee and Michelle's problems went beyond sibling rivalry.
During the divorce, Renee's attorney was able to subpoena the phone records of Michael Pagel. So he turned those over to Renee.
When she examined phone records, she learned that Mike and Michelle were talking frequently.
So she was extremely upset. She was very hurt by this.
There was such significant communication between Mike Pagel and the sister Michelle that it raised a red flag to us right away that there might be some sort of affair going on.
Renee told me how betrayed she felt by her sister. She really struggled with that.
During the interviews with numerous people, it was mentioned that Michelle potentially was having a relationship with Michael. Once I learned that, it's obviously somebody we wanted to look at.
Michelle is brought in for an interview. And though she says that she is saddened by her sister's death, her answers raise eyebrows with investigators.
She didn't speak very highly of Renee. She was not happy at all the way that Renee was handling the divorce.
Michelle clearly took Mike's side in it and kind of put her sister in the bad light. She felt that Mike was a good father, and it was her sister that was really trying to take advantage of him.
We did ask her if she was in a relationship or had a relationship with Michael, and she completely denied it.
Detectives ask Michelle where she was the night of the murder.
She said she was working into the evening, and that evening she was home with her roommate. Basically, she was stating that she was home the evening of the murder.
Michelle did take a polygraph, and she was found to be truthful and did not appear to have any involvement in the homicide.
With Michelle all but ruled out, investigators discover that she isn't the only family member Renee had issues with.
When I spoke with Renee's parents, it was mentioned that Michael, her soon-to-be ex-husband, had a brother. The brother was Charles Pagel. They called him Bo. And they said that he was very strange, very odd.
He and Renee did not get along. Renee didn't like him. She didn't trust him.
When detectives dig deeper, they uncover something troubling.
We learned from a close friend of Renee that he had been married numerous times, and she believed that maybe Bo had murdered his last wife.
Was Bo a killer? And had he now killed again?
That obviously raised some red flags for us as investigators, and that's somebody we wanted to speak with very quickly.
Detectives investigating the vicious stabbing of Renee Pagel are looking at her estranged husband's brother, Bo Pagel.
Bo was married 3 times in the past, and one of his ex-wives died under suspicious circumstances.
One of Renee's friends gives a statement to police claiming that she believed Bo may have killed his ex-wife.
Obviously, what really sent us his way was the potential murder of his last wife, so that had our attention.
Detectives must determine if Bo could actually be a killer. They look deeper into his background.
Bo was a loner, lived at home with his mom. We learned that he was on-the-road trucker, and he traveled all over the country. He would be gone days at a time.
Investigators also look closer at Bo and Renee's fractured relationship.
There was clearly bad blood between him and Renee, dating back years, going back to the wedding.
We found out that Bo refused to be in the wedding. He was going to be the best man. He did not like her, thought she was not good for Mike, and he didn't approve of it whatsoever. He was outspoken to Michael about even marrying Renee.
And I think the relationship between Bo and Mike was really more of an estranged relationship for the 10 years that Mike and Renee were married.
But after Renee and Michael's separation, everything changed.
I do know that once Mike filed for divorce, he and Bo rekindled that relationship and became pretty close.
Bo was, I believe, happy that Renee was now out of the picture and he could have his brother back.
Could Bo have wanted Renee permanently out of Michael's life? Detectives bring him in for questioning.
So he interviewed Bo, and he denied any knowledge of the murder, denied any involvement.
Bo had said that through the week he was on the road trucking. He got home Thursday night.
Bo's alibi was that he was essentially across the state. He had driven a route the day of the homicide. He had gotten back around 6 o'clock and had gone out with some friends for dinner.
And then afterwards, he stated he went home, spoke to his daughter, and then went to bed.
And then the next morning got up and went canoeing with his daughter.
We contacted his work. We spoke to the family that he actually had dinner with that Friday evening to account for they were with him, what restaurant, until what time.
It pretty much matched up.
Though most of his story checks out, no one can confirm that Bo was at home at the time of Renee's murder. Needing more information, detectives reach out to Bo's daughter.
We confirmed with her that they went on the canoe trip in the morning.
Bo's daughter also puts to rest any suspicion that Bo was responsible for her mother's death.
She gave us details about her mother that we didn't know. She was a diabetic, she had some blood sugar problems, and she really didn't care for going to the doctor. So she didn't seek the medical help that she needed, and that ultimately is what resulted in her death.
She did not suspect Bo of doing anything.
Though Bo's alibi isn't ironclad, there is nothing concrete to link him to Renee's murder, and he is released. It's been 6 weeks since the homicide, and the investigation has ground to a halt.
The reason that we were stuck is because there was no physical evidence that would help tie any one person to this crime. We looked at every person. The estranged husband, his brother, Bo, Renee's sister, and Renee's tenant. And there was nothing to link them to this crime.
Police continue investigating for many months, but with no fresh leads, the case goes cold.
It just stalled. There was a point where I felt that we would never have a conclusion in this case.
It was just sad that we couldn't bring closure to Renee and to her family.
As the months went by, I was just like, what is going on?
Once the months turns into years, that was disheartening.
For 13 years, there are no new developments in the case. But through it all, Renee's best friend never gives up hope.
We created a website in the year 2007, and it was a really therapeutic way for people to come and grieve and share stories. And that website was very effective in getting the word out about Renee's murder, doing whatever it took to find justice for Renee.
In a stunning turn of events, on November 18th, 2019, Chris Crandall receives a surprising message on social media.
Mike's brother, Bo, sent me a friend request. And of course, I was very startled. And it was just after that I got a message from Bo. All of a sudden, after all these years, Bo wanted to talk.
Years after Renee Pagel is viciously stabbed to death, her best friend receives a message from Renee's brother-in-law, Bo Pagel, wanting to talk.
And of course, I called the police and let them know that Bo had contacted me.
So we arranged to have the conversation between Chris and Bo recorded.
As a former suspect in Renee's murder, was Bo about to confess?
He called me clearly wanting to let it be known that Mike was losing it. Bo was afraid that he would be Mike's next victim. And I said to Bo, who do you think Mike's first victim was. And he danced around that and wouldn't answer it.
And Bo said, I believe Mike will kill me.
And it was then that I was entertaining the idea that Mike was not so innocent.
I listened to that conversation and was very concerned. Bo believes Mike's capable of killing somebody. We felt this was a big break. We now knew that Bo may have information about whether or not Mike did commit murder.
On February 3rd, 2020, 2 months after his conversation with Chris Crandall, police formally interview Bo.
I just asked him to tell us what he knew about anybody being involved in Renee's murder, and he quickly told us that Mike Pagel was responsible for Renee's murder.
It's a stunning revelation.
It was the break we were looking for. It was the big piece of information that we needed.
Knowing this is their chance to finally solve Renee's murder, police get an official statement from Bo.
Bo laid out the story for us. Back in 2011, Bo and Mike decided to go out. Mike grabbed a 6-pack of beer, and they just drove around and talked as brothers. And they stopped over the top of one bridge over a small river, and in the midst of that conversation, Mike produced a bag, and inside the bag was a knife that was wrapped in a cloth, and Mike made the comment to Bo of, "This is how I finalized my divorce," which was a complete shock to Bo. And it immediately made Bo angry. He said, "I believed you for all these years, we've supported you, and come to find out you're the one responsible. I can't believe you would have done that." And I think this made Mike angry. He expected Bo to congratulate him. So the way Bo described it was out of frustration. Mike took the knife and threw it into the river. Bo described it as about a 12-inch long, bigger knife, and it appeared to be a very strong, sturdy knife.
Investigators get Bo to show them exactly where Michael had thrown the knife.
There was quite a bit of old metal, various pieces of cars and other things inside the river, and in my opinion, that wasn't a safe diving environment. We had to find another means to search the bottom of the river.
Police wonder if they will be able to recover a knife that has been in the water for 9 years. Then, one of the detectives comes up with an idea.
It's called a rare earth magnet. The magnet is something that I've had at home, and it just came to mind as an option for a way to search the watery area and to grab whatever metal pieces were on the bottom of the river.
It was tremendously impressive for him to come up with his own homemade magnet device. And, you know, he concocted his own fishing line and pulling it through the stream, which is remarkable.
Police spend 3 days painstakingly dragging the riverbed with no success.
So we were on our last few passes of the river, and I began pulling toward my side, and then it was, "You're not gonna believe this," just disbelief. The knife was stuck to the magnet, and it was exactly as Bo described.
It was late in the day, I want to say 3 or 4 o'clock, and got the phone call. He got the knife. I'm like, no, are you kidding me? He got the knife, no.
And this is the magnet and the knife exactly as we found it.
It was awesome. It was everything you could hope for when you're investigating a case, to get that piece of evidence that you know you need, that you really weren't sure if it was going to be there, but there it is.
Police now need to confirm if the knife found matches the knife used in Renee Pagel's murder.
We brought it down to the medical examiner's office. They viewed it and instantly said, absolutely. It's consistent with the injuries that are on Renee's body. We were very confident we had the murder weapon.
Unbelievable. We've never had a break like this. We got the needle in the haystack by finding the knife, and now we had a murder weapon that backed up what a witness said.
It allowed us to validate Bo's statement that that knife was thrown in that water by Mike Pagel.
On February 6th, 2020, 13 years after Renee's death, Michael Pagel is officially charged with her murder.
So this case was going to hinge a lot on the testimony of Bo, but it's still circumstantial evidence. And is the jury going to believe him or not?
In the midst of that, the defense attorneys asked if we would consider a plea offer. When someone asks for a plea, it usually means that they're willing to tell the truth. And in this case, that was one of the conditions, is we wanted to hear the truth as part of the plea agreement.
The prosecution agrees to a plea deal of second-degree murder and a minimum of 25 years in prison.
We wanted to get a term of years to make sure he was old enough that he would never harm anyone again.
On May 20th, 2020, 55-year-old Michael Pagel agrees to plead guilty to second-degree murder, avoiding a trial by jury. But at his plea hearing, Michael suddenly turns the case on its head.
It was unbelievable. And I just remember being sick to my stomach.
After 13 years of investigating the heinous murder of Renee Pagel, her estranged husband is finally being charged for the brutal crime. But at his plea hearing, Michael makes an admission that takes everyone by surprise.
I hired my brother, Charles Pagel, to kill Renee Pagel. Charles Pagel murdered Renee Pagel.
We were all absolutely shocked when he said that his brother did this.
Mike maintained the fact that Bo was the one responsible. He admitted that he had orchestrated it and that he had planned it, but insisted that Bo was the one that actually did the stabbing, which was a complete shock to us. We had investigated and we found no evidence, nothing to directly tie Bo Pagel to this murder.
Had Bo been hiding his involvement all along? While detectives take another look at him, they also dig for more evidence against Michael. And after several searches of his home, they make a surprising discovery.
At Mike's house, we found the ceiling had a hidden compartment. When we took this down, we found 3 hard drives in this hidden compartment.
Investigators spend time decoding the contents of Michael's hard drives, and what they find is chilling.
In those hard drives, there was journaling.
I would call it strange. It appeared to be written by almost 2 different personalities, one that would talk back and forth to the other.
He talked about planning to divorce, how much he hated her.
There was a lot of writings about his dislike and his hatred for Renee.
Then, weeks later, police track down a crucial witness.
We uncovered a friend who had said that he had gifted a knife to Michael that was substantially similar to the one that was actually found.
And he admitted that he gave it to Mike as a gift, and it was delivered directly to Mike Pagel. So that helped us put the knife in Mike's hands.
So now you have a knife that was found in the river that now a friend is saying had given to Michael and not to Bo.
While the evidence is circumstantial, police believe it strengthens their case even further against Michael.
There was nothing that could back up Michael's story in terms of physical evidence, any other witnesses, anything else other than his word about it. Whereas Bo at least had stuff to back it up. His alibi backed up, and the physical evidence that he provided backed it up. So there's just absolutely nothing that shows that Bo did this. This was Michael Pagel. This was all him that committed this murder that night.
Investigators conclude what likely happened on the night of Renee's murder.
When the children were sleeping, He snuck out of his house and he went over to Renee's.
It's pretty well known that she donated a kidney.
Obviously, she wasn't strong at this point.
She was asleep in bed, and he walked in with that knife and brutally stabbed her.
I believe that Mike no doubt planned this out.
There's no way you leave a crime scene that clean and it's not carefully planned. How he absolutely didn't leave a blood drop, a fingerprint, a mark, any physical evidence.
Bo tells us about Mike commenting that he had worn coveralls and galoshes. So he had taken precaution to not get his clothes bloody, and that he had removed those items and then put them in a garbage bag and left, and that the clothes were later burned.
He's not a stupid man. He knew enough to cover his tracks. He went in there purposely. He had an intent, he had a purpose, and he went in there to kill her, and he did.
There was anger involved in this crime. This was evil.
But why would Michael kill Renee?
I believe Mike Pagel was very upset with the way the divorce was proceeding, that he didn't get sole custody of the children, that he didn't get the family home. Things just weren't going his way.
He's got motive, and if anybody's got rage, it's the about-to-be ex-husband who's not getting what he wanted.
I think that the writing was on the wall for him that this was the end.
On October 5th, 2020, Michael Pagel is sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison.
I never thought it would take 14 years to bring justice to Renee and to her family. But, you know, you always had in the back of your mind that justice would be served.
It was incredible exhilaration, and I do believe that the information that I provided and the passion that I poured into this did help.
Renee's loved ones will always be inspired by her memory.
The friendship that we had was deep. It was eternal. She brought so much beauty to this world. She was just a bright light shining. Oh, I miss her.
A vibrant young woman making a fresh start in life.
My sister had a great sense of humor. She was just full of life and ideas and fun. She had a new graphic design job, a new relationship, a new place to live. She was looking to a new future.
Is mercilessly slaughtered in her home.
The person slit her throat.
It was a shocking murder.
Whomever the attacker was extremely disturbed.
You just can't register it. She didn't have any enemies. Everyone loved her.
Investigators track down multiple suspects.
There was a creepy guy just watching her.
There was a note that said, saw no signs of life.
Then police discover an enemy in disguise.
They were using other individuals to try to throw us off.
It was a bombshell.
Detectives unmask a killer no one could have imagined.
And I said, what? It didn't make any sense to me.
I was in complete shock.
Gulfport, Florida is an idyllic community complete with sun, sand, and seaside charm.
Gulfport is kind of a classic southern town. It's kind of an arty community now.
Gulfport has a beautiful beach, and people are very friendly. I never felt unsafe living there.
On May 24th, 1984, Gulfport's laid-back lifestyle is shattered when a disturbing discovery is made.
A woman was checking on her neighbor, and when she didn't answer the door, She viewed inside one of the windows and saw a body laying in a pool of blood. And that's when she called 911.
Homicide detectives are sent to the address in Waterview Park.
Entering into the residence, I noticed broken glass, and I saw the victim's body. There was a copious amount of blood pooling around her head. She looked like she had been hit with a blunt object. There were several stab wounds up and around her neck area, like it was an attack of rage. The victim was partially clothed in a black teddy over a white t-shirt.
It was kind of unusual for someone to wear a teddy on top of their t-shirt. It was unsnapped at the crotch, and so I had suspicions that she was sexually assaulted.
Even though the area was so gory, she had no blood on the soles of her feet. And that was important because you could see bloody footprints, and it appeared to be a barefoot as well.
We surmised that the perpetrator stepped in the blood after the attack was over.
The scene is so bloody, it's not yet clear what exactly happened. The body is sent for autopsy while detectives continue surveying the home.
There was blood on the bed, blood smears on the drapes, and blood on the windowsill.
Possibly the attack started in the bedroom area and then traversed over into the living room.
The trail of blood would indicate that she was fighting throughout. I think she was able to get away from her assailant and run through the house and open the door.
There was some blood and hair on the door, and it looks as though she was stopped, drugged back in, and then finished.
Upon examination of the residence, we couldn't find any type of weapon.
The crime scene was indicative of a very involved struggle, yet there was nothing knocked over or in disarray in the house. Now, it's possible that could actually happen that way, but it's also possible somebody went back in and cleaned it up.
Police speak with the woman who found the body. She tells them the victim is her neighbor, Karen Gregory.
She said the victim's boyfriend, David, was at a conference in Providence, Rhode Island. David had not heard from Karen, and so he called and asked if she would check to see if Karen was okay.
Born in Albany, New York in 1948, 36-year-old Karen Gregory was a loving and kind free spirit.
She was the center of attraction at any gathering, and people just loved her. Karen had a great sense of humor. She was a really good artist, had a great eye. She was a smart woman and very clever and witty and talented.
Karen loved to seek out new places and was always up for an adventure.
She traveled a lot. She would go to Jamaica and explore. And I think her ultimate goal was to go to Jamaica and teach art.
Before Karen can make her dream move, a chance meeting in Florida changes her plans.
And then she met David. David was an interesting character and probably a match for my sister's wit. He was very clever, very intelligent. David was a therapist for PTSD Vietnam vets, and they were just a really good match for each other. They were probably almost a year into the relationship where she had been visiting enough and staying there enough that it was time for her to move in with him. This was a new beginning. She had a new graphic design job, a new relationship, a new place to live, and I think she was looking to a new future. She had just moved in with David the day she was killed.
Who would take away Karen's life in such a horrific manner, and why? Detectives hope clues at the scene will point them to the killer.
Well, we found the Village Voice publication from Providence that struck us as really strange because David was supposed to be up there at the time.
That newspaper actually was dated the day that Karen could have been murdered.
Was David really in Providence, or had he returned? Before detectives can contact David to question him, they find another lead outside.
A note was placed on the car. The context of the note itself was was quite telling.
It says, came by, I have something for you, but there was no sign of life. Rather brief note. But obviously, the no sign of life would, send up a red flag.
The note is signed by someone named Peter, but there's no other information, so police have no way to track him down. Officers collect the note as evidence, as Karen's family is notified of her death.
The day I got the call was just a beautiful, warm day. This isn't the kind of day that these things happen on. They had found my sister murdered. And I said, what? It didn't make any sense to me. And my mind just went through all of these situations to make that call impossible. And everything will be okay.
Police ask Karen's brother, Roy, about her relationship with David.
Karen's brother indicated that there was a little conflict between Karen and David in that Karen may have had an interest in another individual.
In Jamaica, she met a guy, and then she'd stay longer and longer on these trips. I think she was kind of torn maybe between both realities and both futures.
We also found out that Karen and David had broken up for a length of time before her death.
It wasn't some huge breakup, and she was still moving in, so we assumed everything was going to be worked out. But the weekend she was moving in is the weekend she was killed. The murder was at David's house, and I knew there was a rift there. So I think that added to maybe, well, you just never know.
Could he have flown out to Providence and rebooked a flight back to Gulfport, committed the homicide, and then jumped back on a plane? We have to track down David. We felt that something was there behind the scenes, and we needed to find out about it.
Coming up, investigators discover a series of suspicious men in Karen's circle.
He had been physically abusive to his first wife.
He made Karen feel very uncomfortable.
And scramble to separate friend from foe.
Here we are building on a story that really raised red flags for us.
He's either protecting somebody or he's just flat out lying.
Until finally, the awful truth is revealed.
It makes me sick to my stomach.
No one would have ever thought that this person murdered this woman.
A day after 36-year-old Karen Gregory was brutally murdered in her home, police in Gulfport, Florida suspect her boyfriend, David Mackey, could have killed her, and they need to track him down.
Detectives found out that David was in Albany and that he had flew there to be with the family for the wake and funeral of Karen.
David Mackey seemed to be concerned about Karen, and he wanted to know what was going on. We weren't going to give David the investigative information that we had.
He said that he wasn't going to be back in Florida for another 2 weeks.
David promises to come down to the station when he is back in town. In the interim, investigators sent officers to canvass Karen's street.
Many of the neighbors heard a scream that night. Many got up and looked outside their windows and saw nothing. They didn't know exactly where it came from. Was it kids in a car? I mean, they didn't really know.
The time of the scream was around 1 o'clock in the morning.
There's some thought the time of death was during the scream. She wasn't discovered until midday the day after that.
The head of the neighborhood watch is one of Karen's closest neighbors and a familiar face detectives can rely on.
George Lewis was a Gulfport firefighter, had grown up in Gulfport. All the police officers know him.
George and his wife, Linda, were very good friends with Detective Larry Tossi.
Well, having somebody like George to depend on was very, very comforting in that if something was going on in the neighborhood, he just was that kind of neighborhood watch guy. George said that he was working in his garage, which was across the street from the murder scene. He said he heard a faint scream. He had the radio up loud. He even went out in the street, didn't see anything.
But George did see something the day before Karen's body was found.
George Lewis described seeing this guy pull up in his car and walk up to the door and then write a note and put it on the windshield of one of the cars.
Did George see Peter, the man who wrote that note?
He didn't know Peter Kille was certainly something that the police wanted to look into because that was the only person they're aware of that went to the house during that time frame.
The next day, as police are figuring out how to track down Peter, they catch a lucky break.
In order to release the remains of the body, Karen's old roommate was asked to identify the victim. And at that time, she brought another person with her.
And he identified himself. It was Peter Kumble.
Investigators bring Peter in to answer some questions.
I noticed the scratch on his hand, thinking, maybe it was done by Karen. He noticed me looking at it, so he moved his hand.
They asked him about that, and he said that his dog did it.
Peter confirms to detectives he is the one who left the note for Karen and says he was at the house around 7:30 p.m.
He had been invited to dinner by Karen. They'd known each other for maybe a year. They were both reggae music fans. He was bringing back a music tape, and that's what he was referring to when he said, "I have something of yours."
Not having anybody respond to the knock on the door, he just left the note and left. During the interview, he didn't seem very upset. Portraying that he was such a close friend to Karen, it kind of struck me as being, strange.
Detectives ask where Peter was when Karen was murdered.
Kumble's explanation for where he was that night was he was at home.
He did indicate that his roommate could verify that. He answered the questions, and he was amenable to whatever I asked him to do.
Peter provides police with his fingerprints and footprints, and while they let him go, detectives will keep an eye on him.
We weren't eliminating Peter Kumble from the investigation.
3 days after the murder, police received the medical examiner's report.
Karen had dozens of stab wounds on her. And it wasn't until they had cleaned her up they realized that the person slit her throat. Karen was tortured. The time of death was a day and a half before her body was discovered.
The report also confirms another disturbing fact.
The autopsy determined that a rape was involved.
The medical examiner found semen, but it wasn't enough to make comparison. And DNA at that time was in its infancy.
Thinking about what she went through, it makes me sick to my stomach. You just can't register it. She didn't have any enemies. Everyone loved her.
After 2 weeks out of state, Karen's boyfriend David returns to Florida and is immediately interviewed by detectives.
David was still very upset. He said he loved her and they were getting serious with each other, and that she had finally found what she was looking for in life.
When detectives reveal they know he and Karen had issues, David brushes it off.
He repeated it was all good. They were in love with each other.
David claims the last time he saw Karen was the day he flew out of state.
Karen had driven David to the airport because he had a conference to attend in Providence.
Skeptical, detectives tell David they can place him back at the crime scene.
And I said, we found the Village Voice publication from Providence.
It was dated the night of the murder here in Gulfport.
He indicated to us he had purchased the Providence publication to check on the weather before he had left.
He told us it was at the newsstand in Gulfport a couple of days prior to the homicide. We have to look into that.
Detectives asked David point blank if he murdered his girlfriend.
He became frustrated, in my opinion, that we'd be looking at him instead of spending time looking for the real killer.
He was pretty adamant in the fact that he was off doing a conference in Providence and he hadn't gone anywhere. He said, I want to be as much of a help rather than a hindrance as I can. He was also asked to submit foot samples, which he did as well.
When asked who might want to kill his girlfriend, David gives a name detectives recognize.
David informed us that he felt that Peter Kumble had some kind of an interest in Karen.
it became clear that David was trying to blame this on Peter Kumble.
Police are investigating the grisly murder of Karen Gregory. Her boyfriend, David Mackey, denies being involved and points detectives towards Peter Kumble, a man police have already questioned and released.
In David's mind, he felt that Kumble was someone who had an interest in Karen, like as a potential girlfriend. David wasn't aware of anything about Kumble being invited to dinner and really probably had no real reason to see why Kumble would come by the house while he was gone. He said that Kumble was an acquaintance, but not a close friend. They knew people in the same circles.
Peter Kumble was always calling Karen up, and that he felt he was going to try to develop a relationship with her, and Karen obviously wouldn't have anything to do with it.
David was concerned that Kumble could be involved, and they needed to look at him closely.
With nothing concrete to link David to the murder, they let him go. Detectives now need to confirm his claim that Peter had ulterior motives around Karen. When police try to bring Peter in for another interview, they hit a problem.
He had left Gulfport right after his first interview.
He had went on vacation, and the detectives found that strange, that him being close to Karen Gregory, that he would leave and go on vacation after her death.
Without the evidence to compel Peter to return, investigators switch gears and delve deeper into David Mackey's alibi. David had told police he had given a presentation in Providence at 9 a.m. on May 23rd, which would have been 8 hours after Karen was killed.
Was it possible for him to have got on a flight, come down, murdered Karen, and got back up to Rhode Island?
Detective Sergeant Tossi decided to take flights in the same time frame.
I found that he could have committed the murder and get back in time and do his presentation. It would have been tight, but it's possible.
Detectives subpoena David's credit card information, but they show no record of David buying any additional flights. David's story about the newspaper also appears to check out.
It was discovered that the paper actually comes out 2 days early, and the gentleman remembered selling the paper to David Mackey. David was telling the truth, and his alibi was solid.
As weeks pass without an arrest, Karen's friends and family become concerned.
Not knowing why or who or how this even happened, you're left with all these questions. The grief was too heavy. There was just a lot of weeping for a long time. Just the slightest little memory of her or thought of her. I can weep right now thinking about that.
For such a small town, it was a shocking murder. I can only imagine what some of the women that lived alone in that community felt when there is a killer out there and they haven't been caught.
A few weeks into the investigation, detectives get a boost when potential suspect Peter Kumble arrives back in town.
He looked a little bit disheveled, he looked a little bit shaky, as if he didn't want to be there type of an attitude.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Peter if he killed Karen Gregory.
He was completely shocked.
Kumble's alibi was he was at home.
But with David pointing the finger at Peter, detectives need to follow up.
He was pretty adamant in the fact that, he hadn't gone anywhere and the roommate could be his alibi witness. Anybody can say they're home and they're in bed. In the middle of the night, they can go out and do what they want to do. And that's a very shaky and unsubstantiated alibi. We didn't have much to hold him at that point, so he left.
Needing something concrete to tie Peter to the murder, investigators hope his footprint sample matches the one found at the scene.
There was a partial bloody footprint on the floor. We did send it off to the sheriff's office. And we waited quite a period of time, and then we heard back that they couldn't find any identifying ridges or swirls.
It's a big disappointment to me that our sheriff's office couldn't make a match.
Detectives refuse to give up.
The photograph of the bloody footprint looks mostly like a smear. So it was sent to Washington for the FBI to look at, which was not uncommon practice, especially if you had something that might be difficult for a local person to do.
The analysis won't be fast, so investigators go back through everything collected at the scene and find a potential piece of evidence.
There was a schematic drawing of a clock.
It appeared to have a blood stain on it. Did the murderer bring that with him and leave that there, forgetting about it? Did he get blood on it while this happened? So it looked like a pretty good clue they needed to follow up on. They were able to determine that these were schematics that had been drawn by Stephen Fischler, who was someone that Karen worked with.
Detectives send the blood on the drawing in for testing, and when they look into Stephen Fischler, they discover something troubling.
We found out from female workers that they felt uncomfortable around him, that he showed the girls pornography, and they took offense.
They indicated they were afraid of him.
According to one friend, Stephen Fischler made Karen feel very uncomfortable many times. He made unwanted advances. At one time, he gave her a provocative novel that he was writing.
Fischler, as far as the way he behaved in the office around women, he was a suspect.
We decided that we needed to have an extensive interview with Stephen Fischler. Stephen Fischler had kind of a defensive attitude. He was curt.
He said that they didn't really know each other. He and Karen had seen each other at work, but she had only been working there a short period of time.
When Stephen was questioned about the schematic, he had no explanation for how it got into her house, other than she probably took it home with her.
Detectives grill Stephen about his reputation among his coworkers.
And he became angry. He says, I had no idea.
We asked him if we'd take a polygraph test. He agreed to do that. Stephen didn't really want to answer the questions. He was extremely frustrated.
Just when investigators think they won't get anything out of him, Stephen says something truly shocking.
During the polygraph, he blurted out, "Okay, I did it."
Everybody thought, well, heck, this guy is confessing.
Two months after Karen Gregory is viciously slaughtered in her home, her coworker Stephen Fischler has just confessed to police.
It was unexpected. Was he really telling the truth?
Police immediately begin to press Stephen for details behind his confession.
We determined that after talking with Stephen, that he blurted out, "Okay, I did it," just out of frustration.
He was angry because he was being accused of this murder. And that was just his personality and his temperament.
Stephen retracts his confession and proceeds with the polygraph.
He passed the polygraph. It showed no deception indicated.
The result was totally unexpected to us. It basically cleared Fischler.
But Stephen's not off the suspect list just yet. He refuses to provide a footprint sample, so police must wait for the results from the schematic drawing to see if any foreign blood is detected.
In this case, the blood was clearly all her blood, and it wasn't Stephen Fischler's. There was a lot of frustration. They'd kind of hit a dead end.
Running out of suspects, investigators switch up their approach and put together a behavioral analysis profile of the killer.
You're trying to look at, what causes people to do what they might do.
It wasn't your general whodunit. Whomever the attacker was extremely disturbed. He was the type of individual that had various fantasies, sexual fantasies, which drove him to commit the murder of Karen Gregory.
Maybe this was a serial killer, which kind of fits into that whole psychological pattern to some degree.
It was probably the most difficult case that I had to deal with. 5 months down the road from the homicide, I just couldn't let the case go, couldn't put it on the shelf.
For Karen's family, coping with the reality that her killer may never be found is overwhelming.
We kind of thought they're never going to solve this. which was just alarming to us. And that's another whole kind of pain that was a nightmare. She was a sweet, wonderful young woman. And the killer was a brute, who butchered her.
Finally, a break comes in December, 5 months after the murder, when detectives make a discovery that revitalizes the case.
Tassi was talking to a person who lived a few blocks away from Karen, and that person told him they had heard the scream. She described it as just a wail, and that it was very disturbing. Tassi was like, he didn't realize it was really that loud that actually over 2 or 3 blocks people heard this.
This new information is in direct conflict with the statements of the neighborhood watch head.
She's several blocks away and she hears the scream, and George is right across the street. How come he didn't hear more than what he said was a faint scream? It didn't make any sense. So we figured we better have another talk with George, which we did.
Detective Tassi, he looked at George as a helper to the police case. George was a firefighter, the neighborhood watch guy that was actively out there.
When we went over his story, he indicated that he had heard the scream, that he walked to the edge of his driveway, looked around and didn't see anything.
Now, George adds a new detail to his account.
Now he sees somebody on the lawn under the big oak tree.
The story was quite a surprise. Why didn't he report it? Why didn't he call?
He didn't really know what to say. I think in many ways he sounded nervous.
George describes the person he saw the night of the murder.
He said he was like 6'4" and had red sandy hair. He was a big, strong-looking guy. It was certainly something that the police wanted to look into.
Armed with the new information, detectives try to track down this mysterious man.
And in doing extensive neighborhood interviews, it was related to us there may be a peeping Tom in the area that fit. We thought, well, we may have something to go on here.
I interviewed one person, and she said that she had a peeping Tom at her window. And when she noticed him, he took off.
Could the peeping Tom be the killer police have been looking for? Investigators show George pictures of possible prowlers.
He couldn't identify any of them. So the mystery man in the lawn remained unidentified.
So there's some thought that he might have been watching that house and watching her and knew that she was alone that night, knew David was out of town.
I felt terrified, especially at night. I kept my doors locked. I didn't want to end up like her.
Detectives find another woman in the neighborhood who recently saw the prowler.
There was a creepy guy just watching her for some unknown reason.
She caught him peeping in the window. He took off.
The woman recognized the man. When she tells police his name, they're stunned.
It was a big surprise.
Detectives hunting for Karen Gregory's killer learn there's a prowler stalking the women of Gulfport, Florida. Could the offender be one and the same? When a victim of the voyeur comes forward with a name, investigators are shocked.
It's the neighbor, George Lewis.
It was totally unexpected to us.
Detectives bring George in for a third time and ask him about the woman's claims.
He admitted he was outside the house, and he had some explanation for why he was there. He was a neighborhood watch guy and always looking out for people. He said he heard a noise or something. They thought, is it possible it's the killer?
He was given the opportunity to take a polygraph test, which he did.
Detectives start by asking about the prowler.
Listening to the polygraph tape and how George Lewis described the man, I really believed him.
Investigators also ask him about the night of the murder.
Did you kill Karen Gregory? George said no.
The polygraph results tell a different story.
The results were disastrous. He failed it miserably.
After he failed it, he had something else to say about the night of the murder.
George admits he hasn't been completely honest and tells police that's why he didn't pass the polygraph.
George Lewis indicated to us the individual that he saw on the lawn left Karen's house itself. He saw George and had approached him and threatened him.
The person walks out and tells him, if you say you saw me here, I'll come back and kill you.
So that's the reason he wasn't forthcoming. He was afraid of him. George Lewis went from just hearing a scream at the edge of his driveway to indicating that he saw the perpetrator.
And then his next story, George said this guy threatened him.
We were very concerned about that because here we are building on a story, so it really raised red flags for us. We felt that, with the abundance of different issues and stories he was telling, he was using other individuals to try to throw us off. We had asked him to do a composite sketch of the individual that he saw. After the sketch was done, we both looked at each other and said, this really can't be happening. We both came to the conclusion it was George when he was younger.
I think he thought the police had a witness who saw somebody in Karen's yard. So he was making this description of the person who scared him get closer and closer to looking like him.
He's either protecting somebody that he knows, or he's just flat out lying. We have to look at George a little closer.
Investigators collect his foot and fingerprints, but with little hard evidence to hold him, George is released. Detectives take a deep dive into George's past and make some disturbing discoveries.
He had been physically abusive to his first wife.
According to her, there were times when he had been violent with her. He had choked her. The crime itself shows some pretty deep-seated violence towards women, and I think there was aspects in his background where you could see that.
George had gotten into a swingers club. That was a part of George I never really saw, or never knew. He's never said anything like that to me. So that was kind of surprising, but things were building up with him and his behavior.
It appears George developed a troubling fascination with Karen before she had even moved in.
One of George's friends told me that Karen was visiting over at David's house. Karen had come out in a bikini, and he made some comment about liking to have an orgy with her. Got aroused. He had gotten into sexual perversions, if you will.
I think there was indications that he was, a peeper of some sort.
Still looking for hard proof, detectives ask George's wife about the night of the murder.
She was woken by the scream. After just a few minutes, George came in from the garage.
The killer would have been covered in blood, but George wasn't.
When you sit back and you look at these things, because you say to yourself, oh, well, maybe he really didn't do it. Maybe his story makes sense. Or maybe he's covering up for somebody that did do it, you know what I mean?
And so now it's, where do we go from here?
At that time, we didn't have, DNA. The only thing that could tie itself into the case was the footprints.
Detectives are still waiting for those results.
It was getting extremely, extremely frustrating for the team.
And then the months just went by, nothing happened.
It seemed like it was just going to be a cold case. And it's like, well, what are we supposed to do with that? You can't just stop here, but they didn't have leads. They didn't know where to go with it. This is about my sister being butchered to death. We were not going to rest till they found who the killer was.
In March 1986, almost 2 years after Karen's murder, the FBI finally finished their analysis on the bloody footprint at the crime scene.
The day that the data came back from the FBI, everybody was elated.
It showed the ridges on the heel from the bare foot, and they can be identified, compare one to someone else.
Detectives have renewed hope the killer is within their reach.
We must have sent 20 sets of footprints.
And they got a result on that relatively quick, which changed the whole case.
A definite match.
No one in Gulfport would have ever thought that this person murdered this woman.
Nearly 2 years since the brutal slaying of Karen Gregory, detectives have just received a report back on the bloody footprint found at the crime scene.
The footprint was sent to the FBI. We were waiting specifically on just that result.
There was a definite match of a footprint of George Lewis to the inked footprint that we had sent up there to the FBI lab.
It was shocking.
It was very hard for me to believe that George Lewis murdered Karen Gregory. He was the head of the crime watch. He was a firefighter. I was in complete shock.
Although no one could believe George was a cold-blooded killer, the evidence doesn't lie.
Footprints with their ridges and their swirls are similar to fingerprints. If you have enough of those patterns to present to a match, then they're just as good.
I didn't want to believe it, and I had to face that. I trusted George. He was toying with me. He certainly wasn't the person that I thought he was.
The detective knows he has to ask his old friend some tough questions.
We asked him to come into the station, and that's when we confronted him with the footprint. That's when he said, I crawled in the window.
It was a bombshell. Now here's a whole new story where he's absolutely in the house.
He indicated that he had heard the scream. He had gone through the bedroom window to try to assist Karen.
He said that he saw her laying there with her throat cut open. Only the killer would have known that her throat was cut.
He said he had stepped in the blood to assist her or help her, and then he had exited out through the bedroom window.
His explanations didn't make sense. If you assume that his story is true, that he was threatened by this person in the yard and was too scared to do anything about it, then why would he go into the house?
Why didn't he call police at that time?
His story is BS, but the nail in the coffin, of course, was the footprint.
Investigators also talked to George's wife again, and they learned he would have had time to clean up after the crime.
His wife had been very defensive of him, but she changed the story. George was gone for the longest time, she said, 20 minutes or more.
We don't have to prove motive. We felt we had enough probable cause then to make an arrest.
I had mixed feelings. I was sorry it was George, but yet I was a little upset that he just let us on.
Nearly 2 years after Karen's brutal murder, on March 15th, 1986, George is charged with first-degree murder and sexual battery.
It was a huge relief that they had finally found someone, but it was a shock, just a shock, and still no reason why would a neighbor do this.
I think in looking at him, it was pretty clear that he had a fairly misogynistic view towards women. He thought she might be an easy mark or an easy target.
At trial, investigators put forward their theory about how the murder unfolded.
George Lewis would have gone over knowing that David was out of town. He came in the house, knifed, and ready to do it, and was living out a fantasy. Teddy had been put on her against her will.
she knew that the only way to get away was fight to get out of that residence.
She was pushed and hit her head against the jalousie windows. That's when she screamed. After that, it got really violent. The rape was involved.
Lewis knew then that he had only one way to go with this, and as a result, he ends up stabbing Karen 21 times.
George Lewis maintains his innocence, but a jury convicts him, and he is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
No one ever really wants to believe that someone that is there to protect and to serve could do something so horrible.
This was really unexpected that he was the killer. That didn't seem like who I would expect a firefighter to be, and certainly not the neighborhood watch guy. Although maybe he was watching for opportunities.
I was relieved we could actually get justice for Karen and all the people who loved her.
There was a little bit of justice in knowing he was in jail. My sister probably would have forgiven him. That's the kind of person she was. It's funny sitting here now. She was alive for as many years as she's now been gone. She never lived, you know, we never got to know who she'd be as an old lady. She was just full of life and ideas and fun and humor. I have her ring on right now that she made for me. Karen and I were really close. And I'll always miss that. And I'll just never forget her.
An all-American woman.
She was a beautiful young gal, and she had a great personality.
She was amazing. She was so kind and so caring. She was my sister. She was my everything.
Is found murdered in her bedroom.
She had been strangled quite violently.
Whoever the killer was crushed the victim's neck.
Police hunt for the culprit.
I had in my mind who committed the crime.
We were convinced that he was our guy.
But the prime suspect slips from their grasp.
I don't get it. Did he really get away with it?
Decades later, leaps in forensic science reignite the investigation.
We're not giving up on the case. Is there a smoking gun? We got to find it.
I figured that if this case could be solved, it could be solved now.
And new evidence leads to a killer no one saw coming.
It was shocking, it was unexpected, and guess what? We have a new suspect.
I was stunned. I was like, really?
In the early morning hours of June 6, 1980, the peaceful suburb of Woods Cross, Utah, is shaken by a frantic 911 call.
What's your name? Steve Strong. Please hurry.
Woods Cross had never had a homicide. This was the first one, and it definitely was not something we were used to.
Police respond to the modest home on the outskirts of Salt Lake City.
Well, I got called to respond to this house that they'd said there had been a homicide. So I went into the bedroom area where the victim was, laying on the floor, kind of laying up against the bed. She appeared that she was in her sleeping clothes, just a little t-shirt and a pair of panties. First thing that I noticed, she had bruising and scratches on her neck area that looked like she had been strangled, and been strangled quite violently. In fact, I believe that she had put up quite a struggle and quite a fight. Torn fingernails and some bruising on her legs and her feet. It was an indication she fought pretty hard. It looked like she had been knocked off of the bed and onto the floor. 2 or 3 of the rungs in the bed that had been broken out. So it was obvious that there was a pretty good struggle had taken place there.
Police searched the rest of the house, looking for clues to what happened.
And looking around, I didn't believe that there could have been a robbery or anything of that nature, because everything else was in place.
It did not look like a robbery or theft. This looked more like a personal attack. This looked more like that she was the target of her killer.
Investigators turned to Steve Strom, the man who had called 911. He tells police the victim is his wife, 25-year-old Karen Strom.
Talking to Steve, he was kind of hysterical, just very upset that his wife was dead.
Steve worked at a manufacturing plant on the graveyard shift.
He said everything was fine when he left the house the night before to go to work. He worked the night shift till about 7 in the morning. And when he got home, he walked into the bedroom and saw his wife.
While investigators continue their hunt for clues, police inform Karen's family of the tragic news.
I was at work at the phone company. My stepmother called me and said, "Your sister's dead." I said, "What? What happened?" She goes, "We don't know yet." That was heart-wrenching. I wanted to know what happened to my sister.
Karen Saltzgiver was born in Bountiful, Utah in 1954, the oldest of 3 children.
Karen and I were 5 years apart. My parents divorced when we were younger, and that's always rough on kids. It was a struggle. But Karen was always there, playing mom, and I think it was just her nurturing instinct. She was amazing. She was strong.
In 1973, Karen married Steve Strom right out of high school at the age of 18.
Karen and Steve were high school sweethearts. Karen was very outgoing, very fun, very loving, and Steve was very quiet. She saw something in him. They used to go four-wheel driving a lot and up in the mountains a lot. It was a sense of freedom for her, and Karen loved nature.
Over the next 7 years, the young couple worked hard to build a life of their own.
Steve worked at a machine shop. Karen worked in accounting for the state of Utah. And they had an apartment in North Salt Lake, and then they bought a house in Woods Cross. It was a family-oriented place, and it was a new development. She was so excited because she got a house and a good job. You know, she had her Camaro and yellow. Yellow was her favorite color. It seemed like her life was on the right path.
Karen's seemingly perfect marriage had a troubling hidden side.
Steve liked to drink, and I think that's what caused a lot of the problems in their marriage. When Steve wasn't drinking, he was very quiet, but when he drank, yeah, there was a whole nother side of him that came out. He was mean. What I witnessed with Steve was a lot of screaming and yelling, and then he'd leave. Mostly what I witnessed with Steve with my sister was the aftermath. She had bruises, and Karen got good at hiding the bruises with makeup, but it's like, you can see them. You know, to me, I didn't understand. Karen defended Steve all the time. He's just going through a bad time. Things are rough. You know, he'll get over it. It's okay.
But 3 months prior to Karen's murder, something changed between her and Steve.
Karen finally had enough, told Steve she wanted a divorce, and I thought, yes, yes. I just wanted the best for her, because she wanted that for me.
But before Karen can move on, her life is brutally cut short.
My world had just fallen apart. My world was crushed. She was my everything. She was my sister, my protector. She was my best friend.
As Coco struggles to come to grips with Karen's death. Back at the crime scene, police continue their search for clues to who may have attacked Karen during the night.
There was no indication that anybody had broke into the house. The next door neighbor said that she had heard nothing. Steve had calmed down by that time. He said that he had found the doors locked, and when he got home, used his key and went into the house.
As Steve is being questioned, Coco arrives looking for answers.
The police didn't give me any details on exactly what happened. They did say that she had been strangled. Then they brought her body out in a black bag, and oh, that just tore me up. It's like, that's my sister. Don't put her in there. Steve was sitting there, and I just looked at him like he finally did it. There was no doubt in my mind that Steve did it.
When Coco got to the house there, the first thing she said, he did it, he finally did it, he killed her.
Anytime you have an incident like this, always start with the husband.
Coming up, detectives discover a tangle of relationships.
Steve said that everything was going great with him. It was pretty obvious that it was not.
Failing the polygraph was pretty damning.
Before their hunt for a killer produces a jaw-dropping twist.
An innocent person just wouldn't flee.
We were worried if we came to the door, he was going to shoot us.
And a new suspect with a dark past emerges.
He raped a girl, and then he stabbed her with a screwdriver and left her for dead.
Who is this guy, and how did he know my sister?
Police in Woods Cross, Utah are investigating the murder of 25-year-old Karen Strong. Her sister, Coco, has told police she suspects Karen's husband, Steve Strong, is the one that killed her.
Coco had been really close with Karen, and they talked a lot. And she had expressed that Steve was a heavy drinker, and when he got drunk or he'd been drinking, he got mean, he got abusive. Coco didn't like him at all.
Detectives learn how Karen had decided to end things with Steve 3 months ago.
She filed for divorce, and then she moved out to my stepmother's house.
Coco says that Karen was only at the house the night she was killed because she felt sorry for Steve.
It was his birthday and their anniversary. Steve had called her and said, "Can you come out and we'll just have dinner together?" And she did, because of her kind heart.
Coco believed that their relationship was over, although Karen agreed to come back and just kind of stay with him for a couple of days.
Recently separated from Steve, Karen had a new suitor named Buff.
Karen told me a little about Buff, that she met this guy that was really different, and he treated her really kind. And I don't know if she thought it would go anywhere, but I know it meant the world to her. He showed her that she could be treated decent and that she deserved it.
Coco said that Steve was also a very jealous person, and in her mind, was sure that he had killed her.
I said, how could it be anybody else? It was, it was Steve.
Detectives confront Steve Strom about Coco's allegations.
He consistently stated that he had a good relationship with his wife and that there was no abuse.
Steve felt that the only reason that they were getting a divorce, it was his drinking. He said that they had worked things out and that they were going to get back together, and she was not going to go through with the divorce.
Investigators ask Steve to account for his movements leading up to when he last saw Karen alive.
Steve said that he and Karen had gone out to dinner earlier that evening, and then they'd come home and watch TV, and then he got ready and left for work.
If Steve is telling the truth, Karen was killed sometime after midnight when Steve left for work, and before 7 a.m. when he returned home to find her body. Detectives ask if the doors were locked during that time, how did Karen's killer get into the house?
Steve gave us the name of about 4 or 5 people that she might have opened the door for, but had indicated probably the one that she would really open the door for after she went to bed would have been Buff.
Steve admits that he knew Karen had been dating Buff while they were separated.
Steve said that the relationship with Karen and Buff was over, and that they were getting back together and gonna make another go of their marriage.
With nothing concrete to hold him, detectives let Steve go. After police release Steve, the news that Karen was murdered spreads through Karen's family.
It just broke everybody's heart. My mom, that was her oldest daughter. She couldn't deal with it. She just shut down and shut off. It was just heart-wrenching, and it was something that was so surreal. I was trying to wrap my head around, she's really gone?
As Karen's loved ones reel from the murder, detectives head to the factory where her husband, Steve, works as a machinist to confirm his timeline and verify his story.
I talked to the supervisor and got copies of his time card, and as far as anybody there could remember, he was on his machine the entire time.
Despite confirming that Steve was at work when he said he was, investigators cannot dismiss their suspicion of him without a better idea of when Karen had been killed.
That timeline was very important to the case because we'd be able to tell who had opportunity during that time.
As detectives continue their investigation at Steve's workplace, one of Steve's co-workers they speak with is 29-year-old Ed Owens.
Steve Strom had named Ed Owens as one of the individuals that Karen would have allowed in. Ed and Steve were not only co-workers, but they had became friends. They socialized together, socialized with their spouses. Both of them liked to drink, and so they oftentimes did it together.
There was an incident where Steve would end up so intoxicated that Ed and Karen had to take Steve home and carry him into the house and put him to bed.
Ed tells detectives that he was working the shift before Steve arrived that night, but had left the plant for his meal break around 8 p.m.
Ed had said that he had left work and then gone to the local bar to get his lunch, and he started drinking with some friends till they closed the bar, and then went out in the parking lot and continued drinking.
Ed came back to the plant about 4:30 in the morning. He was obviously intoxicated. Steve had actually offered Ed a ride home, but Ed had refused and drove home intoxicated.
As investigators talk to Ed, something about his appearance draws their attention.
I did notice that he had some scratches on his arm and close to his eye on the nose.
Detectives question Ed about the scratches. Could he have been scratched while he attacked Karen?
He explained those as he worked on the lathe and there was the shavings. He was always kind of getting scratches or cuts on his thing. Talked to the supervisor at his work, and he indicated that happens quite frequently.
Just to be sure, detectives ask Ed's coworkers to confirm he was drinking with them the night of the murder.
So I interviewed the people he was hanging out with, and they all stated that he was there, and he didn't have any motive as far as I could determine.
With Ed's alibi confirmed, investigators turn their attention to the other man in Karen's love life, her boyfriend, Buff. Did he have motive for murder?
Steve Strom told the police they were reconciling. So then we have to begin to question Karen's termination of that relationship with Buff.
If they were going to get back together, Buff would have been upset about that. His attitude might have been, if he couldn't have her, nobody else would.
Less than a day after 25-year-old Karen Strom is found strangled to death, police in Woods Cross, Utah have ruled out her husband's friend, Ed Owens, as the killer.
There was no indication that Ed had been involved in the death of Karen.
But despite verifying his alibi, detectives do keep Karen's estranged husband, Steve Strom, on the suspect list.
Her sister Coco talked about how abusive he had been and that Karen needed to get out of that relationship.
Now, investigators want to speak with the man Karen started dating shortly after separating from Steve.
Buff Bangeter was a man who Karen Strom had had some degree of a relationship with. And so, of course, law enforcement had reason to talk to Buff.
Detectives begin the interview with the 35-year-old mechanic by informing him of Karen's murder.
He seemed upset when he found out that she had been killed.
Then, Buff stuns investigators by revealing just how serious his relationship with Karen had become.
According to Buff, they had wanted to get married, and it was Buff that persuaded her to go back to see Steve to be sure that what she wanted to do was get the divorce.
Detectives ask Buff where he was on the night Karen was killed.
Buff stated he was at home that whole evening and he would not have harmed her in any way. And he also made the comments that he thought it was Steve. According to Buff, it was pretty obvious that he was very angry about Buff's relationship with Karen.
Even with no one to back up his alibi, police decide to let Buff go.
We didn't eliminate him entirely, but after we interviewed and talked to Buff, we felt pretty confident that he was not the one who had committed that crime. I couldn't place anyone else having done the crime except for Steve. He remained my #1 suspect.
While they wait for crime lab analysis to be completed, detectives keep digging into the people Karen may have let into the house the night she was killed.
I interviewed each of the individuals who Steve indicated that he thought she might let in, took blood samples from each of them. Let's cover all the bases that I could.
Investigators also received the forensics report from the crime scene.
Crime lab went clear through the house and checking for fingerprints, and there was no fingerprints in the house that they could find other than Steve Strom and Karen. And that was pretty damaging as far as evidence towards Steve.
Karen's autopsy results also come back and show no evidence of sexual assault, but do confirm strangulation as the cause of death.
Whoever the killer was crushed the victim's neck. This was an aggressive, violent, vicious attack. Karen was scratching and clawing and fighting for her life.
Karen's fingernails are clipped and preserved.
As far as DNA back in 1980, there was not a lot more that they could do. The testing you could do with any sort of evidence is very limited.
The autopsy also provides an idea of when Karen was killed.
The approximate time of death was between 10 p.m. on the night of the 5th and 2 a.m. on the morning of the 6th.
This means it was possible Karen was killed before Steve left to go to work.
The time of death did not give Steve a strong alibi.
By his own statements, it was after midnight when he went to work, so he was at home during that period of time.
Armed with this new information, investigators reach out to get Steve in for another interview, and he makes a surprise request.
Steve requested to take a polygraph. He said that he was innocent, he didn't kill his wife. Polygraphs are not admissible into court, but it would also have been a good tool to see if he was lying or not. We did a polygraph and asked him if he knew who killed his wife, if he killed his wife, and if she was dead when he went to work. According to the polygraph operator, on those particular questions, he was extremely negative as far as being truthful.
Failing the polygraph was pretty damning to Steve, and we were more and more convinced that Steve was involved in this murder.
Detectives still need more evidence in order to charge Steve with Karen's murder.
I interviewed some of the people she worked with. They had indicated that numerous times saw her with bruises when she came to work. At one time, that she had bruises on her neck, and that she made a comment to them that Steve had choked her. She felt that she was lucky to be alive.
The co-worker's account is the final evidence police need to charge Steve, and a warrant is issued for his arrest.
We went to arrest him at work, but he was not there. One of the co-workers told us Steve was with a friend down in North Salt Lake in an apartment. They had indicated that he was worried that we were coming after him. He was possibly going to be violent and resist arrest. We were worried that if we came to the door, he was going to shoot us.
Police proceed to the apartment address with caution and establish a safety perimeter around the building.
We knew he had guns, that he might be violent. We were anticipating the possibility of it being a very difficult arrest.
Police investigating the murder of Karen Strong are preparing to arrest their main suspect, her estranged husband, Steve.
He had been known to have a weapon. It was a .357 Magnum. We was told that Steve had also made a comment to one of his co-workers that if the police come to get him, he was going to take a couple of pigs with him.
Having that information made us feel very nervous about approaching him.
Police maintain their distance, fearful of a violent confrontation.
There was a SWAT team that was organized that had surrounded the apartment. After several phone calls into the apartment, Steve wasn't cooperative.
Steve refuses to answer police phone calls. 3 hours tick by without a resolution before Steve finally answers.
Finally, he was convinced to come out peacefully.
2 months after his wife was killed, Steve is finally arrested for Karen's murder. The news quickly spreads to her loved ones.
The whole family, when they found out Steve was arrested, kind of breathed a sigh of relief. Good. You know, it was one step closer to being over.
After 2 months of investigation, prosecutors believe they have enough evidence to convict Steve of killing his 25-year-old wife.
There was significant pieces of evidence that pointed at Steve Strong circumstantially. It appeared that he had opportunity, didn't have a good alibi. He had motivation, potentially jealousy. He had history of domestic violence, particularly when Steve would drink. You had the incident where the coworker saw Karen with strangulation marks on her neck, and Karen had told her it was Steve Strong that did it. So that was a significant component to the case. Put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and it did look like they've got a reasonable likelihood of conviction.
Steve is held on remand for 6 months as prosecutors prepare their case. But just before the trial is set to begin, Steve's defense attorney asked the judge to exclude the testimony from Karen's coworker about Steve strangling Karen.
The defense said the coworker didn't actually see it. The coworker is only reporting what Karen told her in what's known as double hearsay. And the judge made an evidentiary ruling that disallowed prosecutors from using that evidence or information at trial.
And that was kind of a shocker to me because that was one of our key pieces of evidence. Interviews where people had seen the bruises, she had told them who gave her the bruises. Unfortunately, all of that comes out to be hearsay evidence and was not going to be admissible to court.
Without an eyewitness to abuse, prosecutors have a hole in their case against Steve.
Without that information, they don't have enough evidence to persuade a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that he killed Karen. And if they go forward and lose, Steve Strong, because of double jeopardy, could never be prosecuted again for Karen's murder.
Prosecutors make the difficult decision to drop the charges and let Steve walk free.
When I found out the charges wouldn't hold, my heart just sank. It was like, what? Why is this happening? Show me why this is happening, because I can't wrap myself around this. I just didn't understand why they didn't have the evidence.
Coco was very upset that we had released him, and so was I, but most of the evidence that we had against him was circumstantial evidence. We didn't have any hard evidence towards Steve.
For the next 4 months, detectives continue digging, trying to find the evidence they need to close the case.
I did a lot of running around during that time, interviewing people and trying to find more evidence. However, most of the stuff we were getting was still hearsay.
By the time the 1-year anniversary of Karen's murder comes, little hope remains.
I felt that I had done everything that I could. My main thing at the time was making sure that I preserved all the evidence we had collected, so if something did come up later, we would be able to use it.
In the summer of 1981, the hunt for Karen's killer goes cold.
A year went by, another year went by, and I'd call anything, do you have anything new? Nothing, Coco, nothing, and it's like, did he really get away with it?
The case remains cold for more than 2 decades, but police in Woods Cross never forget the murder of Karen Strong.
I retired in 2005. However, I have to admit that I was still upset about the fact that I could not tie Steve to the murder.
In 2006, 26 years after the crime, new detectives take a fresh look.
This case was a high-profile case, and at one time there had been a lull in the caseload, so I had asked if I could focus all my time on this case. Knowing that there was new developments in science, I figured that it was the right time to pick this up, because if this case could be solved, it could be solved now. I went through the evidence looking for specific items that could be tested. The items that we sent into the lab for examination first were Karen's fingernails.
Police in 1980 found material under Karen's fingernails, but had no way of testing it. Could this hold the key to identifying Karen's killer?
We was quite worried that the evidence had degraded. I mean, it had been 26 years.
The crime lab tests Karen's fingernails, searching for her attacker's DNA.
When those results came back, it was a bombshell. There was DNA of Steve Strom underneath Karen's fingernails, but also there was unexpected DNA evidence underneath Karen Strom's fingernails. And guess what? We have a new suspect.
Investigators who have reopened the cold case murder of Karen Strong have just received their first clue in more than 25 years. DNA from under Karen's fingernails has been traced to 2 different men, her husband, Steve Strong, and someone on the original investigator's radar.
That DNA belonged to Ed Owens. The fact that Ed Owens's DNA was underneath Karen Strong's fingernails, it was shocking.
Ed Owens was Steve's friend and co-worker. Ed's blood had been collected in 1980, when police first considered him a suspect.
There was no recent contact between the two that anyone was aware of. We got to dig a little bit deeper into Ed Owens as a realistic suspect.
The presence of Ed and Steve's DNA is evidence to investigators the men had contact with Karen. But is it a sign that one or both had killed her? In search of answers, detectives tracked down the now 56-year-old Owens.
Ed and his wife were currently living in Falls Church, Virginia. Initially, when I was talking with Ed, he started asking me questions as far as who the suspect was and any new developments in the case. I was suspicious when talking to Ed because of the questions that he was asking me. I wanted him to come into Woods Cross and meet with me and discuss this matter face to face.
Ed Owens agrees to come back to speak with investigators the following week. Detectives also reach out to the now 53-year-old Steve Strong.
Steve had moved to Henderson, Nevada. I contacted Steve and asked him if he would come up from Henderson and meet with me and go over his statement that he gave back in 1980. He wasn't at all that cooperative. He said that for years he's been telling the authorities that he didn't do it, and he believed that we was still after him.
For prosecutors, Steve's DNA under Karen's fingernails does not, in fact, strengthen the case against him.
It was not new to learn he was with Karen on the night that she had been murdered. We're now looking at this from what can the science show us? Who can we show did what based upon this evidence? So now we need to take the next level of testing and figure out what type of DNA are we talking about.
Detectives resubmit the fingernail DNA for a more detailed analysis. And the forensics lab has another surprise in store for investigators.
It was determined that Steve's sample was very minute and Ed's was the dominant sample. And the substance of Ed's was seminal fluid. I was a little shocked about that.
Steve and Ed were close friends, but there was no relationship between him and Karen.
Karen's autopsy had shown no evidence of sexual assault, so investigators are surprised by the indication of sexual activity.
That was unexpected. Why is Ed Owens' seminal fluid underneath Karen Strom's fingernails? What happened here? Was this consensual sex that then went awry? Was it not consensual sex? Was this a forced sexual assault situation?
In the 1980 investigation, Ed's alibi put him at a bar with friends when Karen was killed.
I contacted the co-workers, people that had been to the bar with Ed on the night of the homicide. Both of the witnesses was unable to say whether Ed was at the bar the whole time.
The co-workers had also noticed the scratches on Ed's hands and face the day after Karen's murder.
Ed was asked how he obtained those injuries, and he said that he was playing with his dog.
Strikingly, that statement contradicts the one Ed gave to detectives 26 years prior.
Ed had said that those scratches were obtained by working on a lathe machine. This was raising some red flags as far as Ed's involvement in this matter.
Detectives are eager to talk to Ed themselves, but he fails to arrive for his scheduled interview.
Ed just mysteriously turned up missing 2 days after he had spoken with me. Left a note for his wife. It was a goodbye note. Well, after hearing this, I subpoenaed some banking records of Ed's, And through those records, we determined that he crossed the border into Mexico. An innocent person just wouldn't up and leave his family and flee.
Detectives get another surprise when they dig deeper into Ed's background.
Back in 1980, the investigators ran a background check on Ed Owens in Utah. I, however, ran the national database on Ed Owens and found that Ed had been arrested in California in 1973 and charged with attempted murder.
A man raped a girl on the beach, strangled her, and then he stabbed her with a screwdriver and left her for dead. Ed Owens is charged and arrested, did go to trial, but Ed Owens' mother gave him an alibi. So the jury did not convict Ed Owens. Even though Ed hadn't been convicted, pieces of the puzzle just start to fall into place. We believe Ed's the killer.
An arrest warrant is issued for Ed Owens for the murder of Karen Strong.
When Sergeant Benson called me and said, "Coco, are you sitting down?" He goes, "Do you know who Ed Owens is?" I said, "I've never heard of him." And he said, "Coco, that's who killed your sister." I was shocked. All these years thinking of Steve, I was stunned. I was like, really? It was like starting all over again from scratch. Who's Ed Owens and how did he know my sister?
It was kind of a shocker to me because I was totally convinced that it was Steve.
With Ed Owens in Mexico, investigators strategize how to get him back to face justice.
I made contact with Ed's mother, advised her that I had a warrant of arrest for him and that he could either come in voluntarily to meet with me or his picture would be on the 5 o'clock news.
And then interestingly enough, Ed Owens then shows up. He came back to Utah, came walking in the door.
I was surprised that Ed actually showed up to the office. I believe that he was trying to put on this persona for his family of what type of a person he was. At that time, I took him to an interview room and attempted to get a statement from Ed. However, he lawyered up and didn't want to make a statement.
On March 14, 2007, after 2.5 decades, Ed Owens is arrested and charged with the murder of Karen Strong.
Our case is looking pretty good to us at this point in time. We've got science now backing us up. We've decimated his alibi. We've got the evidence of flight. So a lot of things were stacking up in favor of a conviction.
But then, 3 weeks before the trial, prosecutors are thrown another curveball when they learn of Ed's defense.
The defense's contention was going to be that Karen was having an affair with Ed. Steve became jealous and enraged about it, and Steve went home and killed her.
The defense attorney was claiming that seminal fluid of Ed's only shows that he had had an affair with Karen, not that he'd actually killed her.
It's a jolt. We were kind of blown away. Ed had never, ever come forward with that story before. This was something new, so it opened up a new can of worms.
Prosecutors know this defense could be enough to raise reasonable doubt to a jury, especially since Steve had originally been charged with Karen's murder. But how could they disprove the defense's claims?
Is there a smoking gun with this case? We got to find it. We now need to regroup. So again, like they did back in 1980, we dismissed the case without prejudice as we're getting close to trial. That was not an easy decision to make, but we knew it was the right thing to do. We were confident we had the right guy, but at that point in time, we weren't confident we had a case where we were going to be able to secure a conviction. So Ed Owens walked away a free man. That was a tough pill to swallow because we knew he wasn't innocent. Can we prove it?
When the case got dismissed, it was very frustrating. When Ed walked out, I was ticked off, to say the least. However, this wasn't the end for us. We were even more determined that we were going to bring him to justice.
"26 years after the murder of Karen Strong, police have arrested their second suspect in the crime, Ed Owens. But prosecutors are forced to drop charges against Ed, leaving Karen's family desperate for justice.
After they released Ed Owens, I told Troy, Please don't give up, you guys. Come on, there's got to be something. Please don't give up.
I made a promise to Coco Saltzgiver. We're not giving up on the case. We're not abandoning it. Dismissal without prejudice means it can be refiled. We knew Ed Owens did it. We just wanted to get to the point where we knew we could actually prove it.
Detectives re-interview those who knew Karen to find out if she really could have been having an affair with Ed Owens before she was killed.
And all the witnesses that I talked to, it was pretty obvious that Steve, being as jealous as he was, and also Karen's relationship with Buff, Karen would not be having an affair with Ed Owens.
With no evidence of sexual assault found during Karen's autopsy, prosecutors need to establish an alternate theory to Ed's claim of an affair.
So why is Ed Owens' seminal fluid underneath Karen Strom's fingernails? The best theory that we had is Ed Owens went into Karen Strom and Steve Strom's home that night in the summer of 1980 with intent to sexually assault her. That Karen successfully stopped him. I believe that that's probably the best answer because there was no genital injury to our victim, Karen Strom. Yet there's a hell of a struggle. And the way he crushed her neck, it's in anger. He didn't get what he wanted.
Prosecutors know they only have one shot at making Ed pay for his crime, and they'll need hard evidence to convince a jury.
We can't let him get away with it now again for what he did in 1980. We had to continue to focus in on that crime scene, focus in on Karen's body, go through all the evidence again, looking at every crime scene photo that we had, blowing things up. It's there. We're not going to give up until we find it.
Investigators spend weeks examining the evidence in minute detail. Then, they catch something on the underwear Karen was wearing the night she was killed.
One of the things that we did notice was there were some very tiny droplets that had never been analyzed. They'd kind of been overlooked.
We submitted those to the crime lab. We did not know exactly what it was.
When those results came back, another one of these aha moments, that material that was on Karen Strom's panties was Ed Owens' blood. And now we've got this. This was not a consensual sexual encounter.
It's the final piece prosecutors are looking for. Ed Owens is picked up and recharged with Karen's murder.
When Ed Owens was rearrested, it was a great feeling. Now we felt like our case was ready for prime time.
At trial, in front of Karen's family, prosecutors present how the crime unfolded.
Ed had gone to the bar, and knowing that Steve was coming into work, slipped out of the bar, and then went to the Strom residence to sexually assault Karen. Struggle ensued. She started lashing out at him. He ended up grabbing her by the throat, killed her, then went back to the bar with his co-workers, using them as an alibi.
Sitting through that trial and watching the evidence they had, it was horrific what he did to her. Oh my God, she must have been terrified. But she fought. Oh, she fought hard.
Who is the best witness against Ed Owens? It's Karen Strom. By the fight she put up and the evidence she gathered, part of what she got out of him when she gouged him was his blood.
The defense argues that Ed is innocent and that Steve killed Karen out of jealousy.
It seemed like he was very cocky and that he was confident that he was going to beat this case.
The judge let me address him at the trial. I said, "You took my sister from me. You took my best friend. You took the person I feel safe with in the world. You took that from me." And he's smiling at me. He was smiling the whole time.
After a 7-day trial, the jury takes just 9 hours to come to a decision. On April 1st, 2009, the jury returns their verdict.
When they said guilty, I just, yes! You know, and then I said, "Karen, we did it! Sissy, we did it! We got him!"
There were a lot of people that waited many, many years for justice with this case. When the jury said guilty, it's a sense of relief, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of justice for the victim.
Almost 30 years after Karen Strom was killed, Ed Owens is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
His first parole hearing will be in 2032. Ed at that time will be in his upper 80s. Ed will essentially be spending the rest of his life in jail.
For Karen's loved ones, Ed may have taken her life, but he can never take Karen from their hearts.
I think of Karen all the time. I have a picture of her on my bookshelf, and I know her energy is still there. I can feel it. She was just so kind and so caring. She was a beautiful person, a beautiful soul. You can never be the same again when somebody's ripped out of your life like that. And you have that hole, but you can heal from something like this. It is possible. But you fill that hole with life. And you hope you live a good life for her too, because she didn't get to.